Chapter 172. The black horse carriage was running very fast on the official road, and the spring trees and green fields outside the window were almost pulled into pure green blocks. Ning Kei looked at the scenery outside the window with mixed feelings. He had just seen the proud goose and the strange man in the back of the mountain of the academy, and now a new and mysterious world was about to open its curtain to him. It was really too much for his eyes to take in. Ning Kei didn't know more about the most mysterious talisman Taoism in the legend except that he saw an old Taoist burning a talisman outside a Taoist temple in Chang'an City. But sitting in the carriage made of stainless steel, which should be extremely heavy, he vaguely felt that he was already in the world of talisman Taoism. No matter how fast the carriage was running, the people in the carriage didn't feel the slightest bump, and the lonely horse in front of the soft rope couldn't carry such a heavy load. Yen Sei looked at his expression and said, "You seem to be thinking about something." Ning Kei turned around and looked at the dirty old Taoist. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "I'm thinking about what talisman is engraved on the carriage. It can actually reduce the weight, just like magic." He didn't ask whether the carriage was engraved with talisman, but directly asked what talisman was engraved. This answer made Master Yen Sei quite satisfied, but the last word made him extremely unhappy. He frowned and said, "Talisman Taoism is talisman Taoism. What does it have to do with devil's doctrine?" Ning Kei just subconsciously classified this magical means beyond his daily experience as magic. He didn't know how harsh the word devil's doctrine was to the minister of offerings of South School of Haotian Taoism. The soft and joyful hoofbeats gradually slowed down, and the black carriage made of stainless steel stopped on the official road in the southern suburbs of Chang'an City. Master Yen Sei led Ning Kei down the carriage. He glanced at the pavilion beside the official road not far away and the thin poplar trees outside the pavilion. He turned back and said to Ning Kei, "Since you know there is talisman engraved on the carriage, try to feel it." Ning Kei was slightly stunned. He walked to the side of the carriage and carefully looked at the black carriage board. He looked very carefully and confirmed that the carriage board was indeed made of stainless steel. Those complicated decorations were deeply engraved into the steel by some kind of sharp blade, and then painted with a kind of glossy paint, so it looked extraordinarily beautiful and somewhat mysterious. The patterns were so complicated that they violated the principles of aesthetics. He looked at it for a very long time, yet was unable to find anything strange about it. A judgment gradually arose in his heart. The talisman markings that were truly effective shouldn't be this complicated. Those complicated lines that looked like branches and vines might be a smokescreen used to conceal the true talisman markings. He had read a few books on talisman Taoism in the old library, but those books were only introductions and did not have any objective understanding of talisman patterns. It was basically impossible to find the effective talisman pattern from such complicated patterns. However, since Master Yen Sei wanted him to feel it, it should be a kind of assessment. After pondering for a moment, he slowly closed his eyes, raised his arm, and used his fingertips to gently brush over the runes that were deeply embedded into the steel. Suddenly, he furrowed his brows. When he opened his eyes to look, there was nothing strange about the complicated decorations on the carriage. But now, when he closed his eyes and used his psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, he found that there was a layer on his fingertips. The layer was very thin, like an invisible membrane between his fingertips and the carriage. With a slight distraction of his psyche power, the membrane that he sensed disappeared instantly. Ning Kei was silent for a moment and entered the meditative state that he was best at. He began to use his psyche power to sense the slightest changes of the chi of heaven and earth. As expected, the invisible membrane appeared again between his fingertips and the carriage. This time, he was more prepared and his perception was more delicate. He could clearly feel that the membrane was flowing slowly. Master Yen Sei's voice rang in his ears, "What do you feel?" Ning Kei carefully sensed it. After a long silence, he seriously replied, "A very light flow of the chi of heaven and earth." Master Yen Sei continued to ask, what kind of flow? What is it like? Ning Ke calmly replied, like water, but lighter than water, more empty. More like wind, but it can't be wind. Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Ke beside the carriage. He slowly frowned and asked, why can't it be wind? After a moment of silence, Ning Ke replied, because, the flow of the primordial qi on the talisman pattern is too regular, as if it goes in a fixed route, like in a complete system. But the wind is the flow of air, so it should not be regular. Master Yen Sei's tightly frowned eyebrows gradually relaxed. He looked at Ning Ke's back with his eyes shining brightly. It seemed that he was praising Ning Ke and also marveling at him. Because Ning Ke's performance at this moment had far exceeded his best imagination. Ning Ke's fingers left the carriage. He looked back at Yen Sei and said unconfidently, Master, I just said it based on my feeling. Feeling is the most important qualification for practicing talisman Taoism. Master Yen Sei gently stroked the sparse beard on his chin and lovingly looked at him. His laughter was hoarse and weird, like an old farmer who dug out antiques in his backyard. He said, you are very sensitive, more sensitive than I thought. I like it very much. Ning Ke did not know how to answer. The flow of the qi of heaven and earth you feel is the smell of wind, because what I drew on the carriage is the talisman of wind. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said, as for why the wind goes in a fixed route and why it has such a regular pattern, in your words, it is in a complete system. The reason is very simple, because the talisman determines the direction for it. Follow me. Master Yen Sei flicked his sleeves and slowly walked to the poplar tree in the pavilion beside the road with his hands behind his back. Ning Ke walked to the horse in front of the carriage, looked at its big black eyes and said with a smile, you must be the most comfortable horse in the world. The horse gently snorted and lowered its head to chew the hay in the bag. It silently agreed with this statement. Ning Ke looked at the back of Master Yen Sei and quickened his pace to follow him. Master Yen Sei sat in the center of the pavilion with his legs crossed. A small charcoal stove and a tea set appeared beside him. Ning Ke walked into the pavilion and saw the master was preparing to make tea by himself. He hurried to take over the task. Although it was the divine talisman master who cried to accept him as a disciple that day, he would never be so arrogant to miss this opportunity to serve the master and please him. The water was boiling and the tea was fragrant. Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Ke who was quietly serving tea and nodded with appreciation. He tapped the tea tray with his index finger to indicate Ning Ke to sit down and said, there are many ways of cultivation, such as swordsmanship, body skills and tactical arrays. Our ability to draw talismans is generally called talisman skill, but we don't call it that. We call it talisman Taoism. Ning Ke respectfully put the teacup in front of the master and sat still and listened carefully. Master Yen Sei picked up the teacup and took a sip. He asked, do you know what talisman Taoism means? Ning Ke pondered for a moment and tentatively asked, entering Tao by talisman. Ha ha ha. Master Yen Sei laughed and looked at him. He shook his head and said, everyone wants to enter Tao by seeking Tao. They enter Tao by swordsmanship, killing and love. Even the West Hill Divine Palace can't get rid of this mode of thinking, let alone you. But what about the Tao in the mortal world? The supreme Tao is illusory. How can we find it? The meaning of talisman Taoism is actually very simple. That is, entering Tao by talisman Taoism. Entering Tao by talisman Taoism. Ning Ke wondered what it meant, but he couldn't figure it out. What is talisman? Talisman is a pattern, a line and a trace. Master Yen Sei gradually stopped smiling and looked at him seriously. He said, the trace of a snake crawling over the sand is a talisman. The veins among the dead leaves are talismans. The ruts left on the muddy ground are talismans. The blood vessels of beasts are talismans. The trace of water flowing is talisman. The trace of wind blowing is talisman. The crack on the dry earth is talisman. The cloud in the blue sky is also talisman. It was a very simple and clear statement. Ning Ke was shocked and speechless for a long time. According to Master Yen Sei, all traces in the world were talismans. This idea had completely exceeded his realm of thinking. After a long silence, he asked, "Master, is drawing talisman imitating all traces in nature?" Master Yen Sei was slightly stunned. He looked at him and said with a smile, "That's a painter, not a talisman master." A few green leaves were blown off the branches by the wind on the side of the road, but before they fell into the slightly wet field, they were picked up by a gust of wind and gently floated to the top of the pavilion. They fell on the tiles that had been washed dark by the rain, and made a few light popping sounds. The blood vessels of beasts are talismans. This kind of talisman can only maintain their survival. The trace of water flowing is talisman. This kind of talisman can only make them go from high to low according to the decree of Haotian. The veins among the dead leaves are talisman. This kind of talisman can only make them pour the nutrients and water absorbed by their roots into the leaves as they have done for hundreds of millions of years. Master Yen Sei calmly said, "These talismans are all natural talismans. They are born in nature and wither in nature. They coexist with the chi of heaven and earth, just like the truth that each of us lives in this world. However, whether human beings cultivate or study talisman Taoism, they have already exceeded the original mission of human beings in the world. That is to say, it has exceeded the need of survival. Therefore, the real meaning of talisman Taoism must come from nature, but must be higher than nature." Ning Ke listened silently. He faintly felt that although the master was talking about talisman Taoism, it contained a lot of great truths. Master Yen Sei drank up the remaining tea in the cup, looked at him and continued to say, "The talismans that come from nature but are higher than nature must go through several processes: copying, understanding, induction, simplification, purification, and interest. The so-called talismans are the lines and traces that human beings have learned and extracted from the talismans of nature for countless years." Ning Ke filled the teacup for the master and sat back to ask, "Then what is Tao?" "Tao is to know. Let who know? Let the chi of heaven and earth know." Ning Ke was stunned and asked confusedly, "Let the chi of heaven and earth know what?" Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "Let the chi of heaven and earth know what we want to do. All the means of human cultivation are inseparable from the control of the chi of heaven and earth. Controlling the chi of heaven and earth with swordsmanship and controlling the flying sword by psyche power is too indirect after all. Although the psyche master directly controls the chi of heaven and earth to attack the enemy, it is too simple and can only attack the opponent's sense of perception. Only talisman Taoism is between the two, but its state is higher than the two, because the ultimate goal of talisman Taoism is to tell the chi of heaven and earth what you want to do, and then the chi of heaven and earth will help you do it. The chi of heaven and earth has no eyes and ears, so it can never know what kind of strange ideas you have in your sense of perception. It is even more impossible for it to know that you want to condense the rain into thousands of sharp invisible knives, so how can you let it know what you mean? Talisman is the bridge between the human psyche power and the chi of heaven and earth. The talisman master condenses the chi of heaven and earth into these lines and traces with psyche power. Once it is stimulated, it can resonate with the surrounding chi of heaven and earth, and then it can make the wind rise, the water move, the clouds appear and disappear, and the sky dry. Ning Ke vaguely grasped the key of the problem. Master Yen Sei looked at the expression on his face and asked, "You seem to understand something. I once heard from a friend that the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in the human body is like a musical instrument, and the psyche power is the air. Only when it is blown into the instrument can it become a beautiful music, and then the chi of heaven and earth can understand it and resonate with it." Ning Ke looked at Master Yen Sei and said, "According to your previous explanation, I think that since talisman Taoism uses Fu to tell the chi of heaven and earth what you want to do, can it be said that Fu is equivalent to the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in our body?" Your friend's state is very high, and his explanation is very clever. Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "Of course, you are also worth teaching. The acupoints of the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in your body are too few, so it is very troublesome to cultivate swordsmanship or other things. But talisman Taoism is different. As long as you can perceive the qi of heaven and earth, you can perceive the subtle differences between them, and then record them with Fu and resonate with them, you can succeed." Ning Ke asked with confusion, "Since the talisman master has been learning and recording the talisman of nature for thousands of years, is there no ready-made Fu? If there are the current Fu, can I cultivate talisman Taoism without perceiving the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth?" Master Yen Sei laughed, gently stroked his beard and asked, "Are there two identical leaves in the world?" Ning Ke thought that if he asked about eggs, he would really doubt whether he was Da Vinci or not, so he answered, "No." "Then is it possible for there to be two identical people in the world?" "Of course not. In this case, you can't be me, and your psyche power can't be the same as mine. Then why can the qi of heaven and earth know that they are the same when you write the same Fu?" Ning Ke didn't understand at all. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said calmly, "For Talisman Master, our psyche power is like countless different words, and the so-called Fu is the combination of these words. The problem is that I am from Chang and who speaks the official language, while you are from the South Sea who speaks the Fire Lu language. We put our words into the same combination, so it is absolutely impossible for us to write the same article. There may be only dozens of languages in the world, but the psyche power of each talisman master is a completely different language. I made a Fu of 4-6, and the qi of heaven and earth can hear the impassioned words in it. You also made a Fu of 4-6, and the qi of heaven and earth can read it, but the qi of heaven and earth is at a loss, wondering why this guy's words are so incoherent and what does he want to say." Ning Ke understood and bowed deeply to Master Yen Sei, expressing his gratitude. "There were settings in my previous novels, but the worldview was very crude. If I could avoid it, I would avoid it. I didn't avoid it in this Shoei from the beginning. I think it's very courageous and bold to do so, and I firmly believe that this illusory world is self-justifying. Just like today's chapter, maybe it is only 4,000 words in your eyes, but such 4,000 words are much more difficult to write than the 10,000 words when I was climbing the mountain. I am proud of myself when I write it. I know many people don't like to see me being narcissistic and long-winded, so don't look at me. I can't suppress my pride. Except for a few days of self-doubt every month, for most of my life, I always feel that I am great at writing novels and making up stories, but I don't like to cast pearls before swine. Since I am such a bright big white pig, I am very afraid that you can't see my whiteness, my fatness, and my goodness, so I can't help but often jump out to remind you of my greatness. Finally, I want to flatter you. You like to read my novels and make up stories, which shows that your appreciation ability is also very great. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation or monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 173. Ning Ke looked at the half cup of cold tea in front of him and concentrated on thinking about the master's words at this time. Master Yen Sei smiled slightly and raised his skinny arm. He simply drew something in the air in front of him with his index finger. The air in the pavilion suddenly became dry. A weak flame magically appeared in front of Ning Ke and then disappeared with a poof. He was so scared that he almost jumped up from the ground. Master Yen Sei smiled and said, "Your friend said that the snow mountain and ocean of qi are strings. The lines of talisman can also be regarded as strings. You can play a song that heaven and earth can understand. But I still think it is more accurate to describe it as an article. Talisman can not only let heaven and earth understand the beauty of the melody, but also can express ideas more clearly and find more subtle differences besides movement and stillness. After saying this, Master Yen Sei raised his right hand again and drew 6 lines in the air with his index finger. Ning Kai only felt a wave of wetness rising from the air drawn by the master's finger, and then coming to his face. With a light "pa" sound, he subconsciously reached out to touch it, and found that his face was wet, as if he had just washed it. Different psyche power and different lines can be used to write a completely different article and cause completely different effects. Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Kai, who kept touching his face like an infatuated fool, and said with a smile, "I teach you Talisman Taoism to teach you how to write an article." How to write an article? After learning the classics of predecessors and perceiving the law of the Qi of heaven and earth, how to write the last stroke on the paper and let the Qi of heaven and earth know your mind. There is no other trick in the last step, or it can only be a trick. What does the word trick mean? It refers to talent. If you can write it, you can write it. If you can't, even if you don't sleep day and night and immerse yourself in the ink pool of the river, you still can't write it. Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Kai and said, "The last stroke of Talisman Taoism depends on talent. Talent is the most precious gift that Haotian gives us. Only a few people can have this kind of luck, and you have this kind of luck. This seems to be too difficult." Ning Kai's emotions were somewhat at a loss. He had seen a miracle, but he did not know how the miracle had happened. The master had talked and talked, but in the end, he still walked back to the old path of metaphysics. He did not hear any operational guidance. Talent was something that could not be explained clearly, not to mention using this kind of unclear thing to achieve the most crucial stroke. If Talisman Taoism ultimately depends on talent, then the first cultivator who discovered Talisman Taoism in the world saw the traces of talisman lines between heaven and earth, subconsciously copied them and wrote the first talisman. According to you, Talisman Taoism can't be inherited, then how could he deliberated over his words and continued, pass on this civilization? Master Yen Sei pondered for a moment and said, "Although Talisman Taoism can't be inherited, the spirit of Talisman Taoism can be inherited. Words can record thoughts, and the past can be recorded." How did the earliest talisman master discover and write the first talisman? It must be a kind of coincidence. Perhaps tens of thousands of years ago, the grand cultivator walked to some kind of cliff, looked at the crack of the mountain rock, and suddenly felt something. He concentrated his spirit in the sword at his waist, and casually waved it to condense the primordial chi of the cliff into it. The first talisman must be a coincidence and a spontaneous existence. When the grand cultivator found the secret contained in those sword marks, he would definitely try again. If he succeeded again, the second talisman would no longer be a coincidence, but a conscious existence. Ning Kai asked, "But it is also possible that the cultivator did not write the second talisman in his life." Master Yen Sei looked at him and said, "If the first cultivator did not succeed, there would be a second cultivator, a third, and a fourth cultivator. The beginning of heaven and earth is endless, and cultivators are endless. They keep exploring the secrets of the world, so there must be a successful and conscious predecessor, which is undoubtedly inevitable." Ning Kai nodded and accepted the advice. Master Yen Sei said, "The same principle is that Talisman Taoism can't be inherited, but the spirit of Talisman Taoism can be inherited." Before the cultivator died, he would definitely tell his disciple, and his disciple would try again. He might succeed, or he might fail, and it was even possible that the lineage would be cut off. But I believe that after countless years, there will be another grand cultivator who finds the secret of Talisman Taoism and passes it on to his disciple. That disciple will try again. If he succeeds, the lineage will be inherited again, until finally there is a lineage that succeeds, and the lineage has been inherited until today. Ning Kai raised his head and said with emotion, "It's really a big wave washing away the sand. I don't know how many grand cultivators' skills have not been inherited. It's not a big wave washing away the sand, but more like climbing a mountain that can never be climbed to the top. Some people are forced to stop at the foot of the mountain, and some people climb to the mountainside, but are blown off the cliff by the mountain wind. Today, the inheritance of talisman Taoism has reached the peak now. But if you look into the future, you will know that this mountain is infinitely high. Master Yen Sei looked at him and sighed, it's too difficult for talisman Taoism to appear. The word difficult can't describe the inheritance of talisman Taoism until today. It's like a tragic and stirring scene of a man guarding the pass. That's why I'm so excited when I find that you have potential. Since you are lucky to have this potential, you must cherish it, not only for yourself, but also for talisman Taoism itself. Ning Ke heard the endless sorrow of vicissitudes, and his body became slightly stiff, as if he saw those pictures in countless years. In ancient times, a tribal wizard in animal skin came to a cliff cave to rest after presiding over a sacrificial ceremony. The tribal wizard sang an obscure song and picked up a red stone to draw a picture on the wall of the cave. The wizard wanted to describe that the fire was very good, very beautiful, and very red today. But he didn't expect that the painting was only half finished, and then it burned on the wall of the cave. The wizard screamed and fell to the ground in embarrassment. He kept kowtowing to the burning picture, and the animal skin on his buttocks kept trembling because of fear. The people in the tribe heard the wizard scream and rushed into the cliff cave. Then they also saw the burning picture, and knelt on the ground in fear, crying and shouting, thinking that it was some kind of evil worship. The wizard was the wisest person in the tribe. After he calmed down, he drove everyone out of the cliff cave. The burning picture gradually went out, and he looked at the remaining black marks on the wall of the cave. After hesitating for a long time, he nervously stretched out his fingers to touch it. Gradually his eyes brightened, and he turned around to find the red stone in the cave and tried to draw the picture again with trembling hands. After that day, the wizard could no longer draw the burning picture, but he had become the greatest wizard around the plateau. Countless people died in the war between the Central Plains and the wilderness. Blood soaked the black wilderness, soaking the grass and mud into something like chili. A practitioner from Min Mountain silently squatted in the wilderness, looking at the body of his brother in front of him. He held a branch in his hand, and drew on the blood and mud unconsciously. Not far behind him, the black and red wilderness seemed to come alive. It kept arching up and then scattered. Countless earthworms and insects panicked and scattered, as if there was a big mutated earthworm underneath. A disciple held the original Fu character left by his teacher, and kept copying on the yellow paper. He copied it from a teenager to an old man, until his hair turned white. The yellow paper behind him filled the whole room, and cobwebs formed on the beams. He kept copying. Someone sat on the high peak of Zhongli Mountain, holding a drawing board in his arms, and various colors of paint beside him. He looked at the clouds in the mountain, and painted from dawn to dusk, and then welcomed the sunrise. Winter passed, spring came, and summer came. He kept on drawing. From ancient times to the present, those who were extremely lucky or accidentally entered talisman Taoism, and those disciples who wanted to master talisman Taoism, kept on copying the traces between heaven and earth, and kept on thinking about the article in their hearts. They finished the paper in their rooms, used up their brushes, painted the rivers and mountains, and dyed the pools black. Maybe they succeeded, maybe they failed, but they had been working hard and trying. It was because of this kind of hard work and trying that the mysterious gift that Haotian had given to mankind was not completely taken back. It had been passed down to this day after danger. Every talisman master has the obligation to pass down what he has learned in his lifetime. Perhaps it can be said that this is a responsibility that we cannot refuse. Because those predecessors did exactly this. They exhausted all their strength and spirit to let the talisman Tao still exist in our world. Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Ke, who lowered his head, and said with a dignified expression, "I am satisfied to have a successor like you. However, it is sad that the inheritance of talisman Taoism, as I said before, can only pass on the spirit, but cannot pass on the technique. So whether the spirit of talisman Taoism will not be cut off by me, depends on you." Ning Ke bowed to him and said, "I will try my best not to let you down." Disappointed? What is disappointed? If I only hope that you can pass on talisman Taoism, then I believe you will not let me down, because I have a pair of divine talisman master's eyes. I know it is not difficult for you. But my hope for you is not limited to this. I always think that there is a kind of power that limits the inheritance of talisman Taoism. You know, including me, no divine talisman master in the world can really see through talisman Taoism. Since we can't see through it, naturally we can't pass on the core and also the simplest truth of talisman Taoism. I am too old to cross that threshold. If you have the opportunity to cross that threshold in the future, then I believe that the inheritance of talisman Taoism will become an easy thing. At that time, with talisman Taoism, you can create mountains and rivers by waving your hands. It sounds like a miracle, but I firmly believe that one day people can do it, and it should be something that talisman Taoism must do. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said quietly, Ning Ke, I hope you can become such a person. The greater the disappointment, the greater the hope. If Ning Ke didn't want to let Master Yen Sei down, he had to carry this heavy hope. He looked at the opposite side and felt that there were two mountains on his shoulders. Can I become such a person? You have to become such a person. Ning Ke looked at the old and sad face of Master Yen Sei and suddenly said, Master, please tell me the most basic thing. Master Yen Sei stared at Ning Ke's eyes for a long time. The emotion on his wrinkled face disappeared, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. He comforted Ning Ke and said softly, the journey of thousands of miles starts with your feet. I wish you a pleasant journey. How can I draw a talisman? First of all, you have to feel the chi of heaven and earth, the more delicate the better. Then, according to what you see, you can draw the traces of the chi of heaven and earth. How can I draw if I can't see it? Cultivators never see the world with their eyes. That's the feeling. Yes, draw according to your feeling. Can I draw randomly? Then you should poke your eyes to blind first. Master Yen Sei stared at him angrily, took out a few books from behind and threw them to him. Ning Ke was almost smashed to death. Because what he caught was not just a few books, but dozens of books. Each book was very thick, and together they seemed to be heavier than Chin Pipi. He didn't know when the old Taoist secretly moved them from the carriage. Ning Ke picked up a book and opened it. Looking at the meandering lines on the front page, he found that they were not words, and they were so ugly that they could not even be called abstract paintings. He asked blankly, are these talismans? Yes, these are the talismans I have collected in my life, most of which are Taoist talismans. Master Yen Sei poured a cup of tea for himself to moisten his throat, and then he raised his head and continued, these are the crystallization of the wisdom of the predecessors. When you study the traces of heaven and earth, don't forget to refer to these talismans. As I said before, these are the articles written by the talisman masters of the previous generation with their characters. Even if you are good at plagiarizing and can write all the models from memory, the marking teacher still can't understand them. Ning Ke regretfully said, I know, the marking teacher's surname is Tian and his given name is Di, and he is illiterate. Then he asked confusedly, since I can't plagiarize, what's the use of learning these talismans of the previous generation? Just like perceiving the nature talismans of heaven and earth, these talismans are just for reference. You can't be bound by these traces, but should forget these traces through observation, comprehend their spirit, and finally find your own suitable traces. Forget the traces and comprehend the spirit. Isn't this the same as forgetting the form and comprehending the meaning? Ning Ke suddenly thought of the process of reading books in the old library this year, and could not help but be shocked speechless. It turned out that the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong that he made should be used at this moment. Master Yen Sei saw his shocked expression, frowned and asked. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke honestly reported his past of reading books in the old library of the academy to the master, and also mentioned the origin of the chicken soup calligraphy. That day, I found that I could barely understand some of the characters left by the talisman masters by using the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. Because of joy, I went to the House of Red Sleeves to drink to celebrate. As a result, I drank too much and wrote the chicken soup calligraphy. Probably because I was too drunk to think, I wrote all the strokes that I comprehended in the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong into that calligraphy, and then it caught your attention. After saying this, Ning Ke subconsciously turned his head to look at the sky outside the pavilion, wondering if there was really God's will in the unseen world. Master Yen Sei smiled and said, "It's not that Haotian chose you, but that you have the ability and talent to win this choice. Master, just now when you drew casually, a handful of clear water hit my face. I know it's a talisman, but can fingers draw talismans in the air? If every talisman master's talisman is unique, then every talisman should be absolutely the same. Perhaps it can be controlled by pen and ink, but how can it be controlled by a casual drawing? Even pen and ink can't guarantee that every talisman is exactly the same, because you use different paper, and the speed of ink is also different. Talismans move with the talisman master's mind, so the subtle difference is not too important. On the contrary, as long as this subtle difference is not against the will, it can often conform to the talisman master's psyche power at that time, and the effect is better." Master Yen Sei continued, "As for drawing talismans with fingers in the air, compared with pen and ink, it is more unstable. But the talisman master who can draw talismans without objects has already completely mastered his own psyche power. In other words, the previous drawing is different from the latter, but the final effect is exactly the same." Ning Ke asked, "What kind of talisman master can completely master his own psyche power and thus draw talismans without objects?" Master Yen Sei pointed to his nose and said with a smile, "Divine Talisman Master." Ning Ke was deeply shocked and frustrated. "I divide talismans into 2 kinds, definite and infinitive. Definite talismans rely on external objects, whether it is pen and ink engraving or sculpture. It takes a long time to draw talismans, but the final power is greater. Talismans without objects are infinitive, which can be completed in an instant, but the power is ordinary." Hearing the 2 words definite and infinitive, Ning Ke's mind was refreshed, and he thought of the familiar verb features, such as soil, soil, soil and so on. Then he immediately came to his senses and remembered that he was learning talisman Taoism in the pavilion instead of learning English in the special class. He rubbed his face angrily and asked, "In this case, why do you still need to learn infinitive? It seems very difficult." Master Yen Sei looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "Talisman Taoism is indeed powerful, and cultivators in the same state, even psyche masters can't defeat talisman masters. But this is just a theory on paper. What if I really fight with other cultivators? Lu Bai's flying sword breaks through the air, and I have to look for pen and ink everywhere in a hurry. When I perceive the damn flying sword coming from the clouds, I only need to use my psyche power as ink, and then I can stop it by drawing talismans in the air. Then I can think of a way to draw talismans to fight back. At this time, what's the use of pen and ink?" Listening to Master Yen Sei's proud and complacent explanation, Ning Ke felt that something was wrong. After a moment of hesitation, he asked curiously, "Master, have you ever fought with Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, who is the strongest in the world?" "Metaphorical. I mean metaphorical." Master Yen Sei roared angrily, but he thought in his heart, "My arm was hurt by Lu Bai's sword, but I also erased half of his eyebrows. Would I tell you about this glorious record? If you don't want to be shot by the enemy's arrow when you just go to the battlefield, infinitive is a must. But, you said before that only divine talisman masters can master the talisman of nothing. You are extremely talented in talisman Taoism, and you have met such a great talisman Taoism master like me. How difficult it is to become a divine talisman master. After going back, first memorize these pamphlets, and then carefully understand the chi of heaven and earth." Ning Ke stared at the pile of thick books beside him, thinking that these were pamphlets. Master Yen Sei frowned and regretfully said, "You are still in the no-doubt state, and you can only preliminarily understand the law of the flow of the qi of heaven and earth. If you have already been in the see-through state, you can blend into the qi of heaven and earth, or if you have simply entered the knowing destiny state and fundamentally mastered the law of the qi of heaven and earth, plus your talent in talisman Taoism, it will be much easier to cross the first level." Ning Ke was speechless, thinking that if I can know destiny, why should I learn talisman Taoism so troublesome? "Master, in your opinion, according to my talent, how many years can I become a divine talisman master like you? If you concentrate on talisman Taoism, you can leave the academy and follow me to the mountain to practice hard." "About 10 years. Ning Ke sighed regretfully and said, 10 more years. Master Yen Sei angrily said, 10 years later, you are not yet 30 years old. Ning Ke said angrily, "I, your young master, will become a legendary divine talisman master in 10 years. Why are you not excited at all?" Sang Sang turned back and looked at him, saying, "Young master, that will happen in 10 years. But we must repair the door today." Ning Ke put the teapot on the table and said, "Don't repair it. Go buy something for me first." Sang Sang asked confusedly, "What are you in a hurry to buy at this time? The door hasn't been repaired yet." "Brush, ink, cinnabar, and other messy materials." Ning Ke wrote a note and handed it to her, saying, 10 years to become a divine talisman master is really too slow. I want to start learning talisman Taoism right now. Seize every minute. Seize every minute. Sang Sang opened her bright willow-shaped eyes and looked at him who was dancing with joy. She hesitated and called, "Young master, yes, what's up? Are you confused because of happiness?" "Maybe a little. First of all, I strongly want the monthly vote. If I don't want it, it will be unjustifiable. Please vote your monthly vote. I promise you that Ning Ke will become a divine talisman master within 2 years. These words really deserve to be slapped. Slap me with the monthly vote. Secondly, tomorrow is the birthday of my eldest daughter, Tang Tang. My leader and I wish her a happy birthday. Don't be silly, be sensible, and be healthy and happy. At the same time, tomorrow is the birthday of my daughter, Lon Lon. My leader and I also wish her a happy birthday. Don't be silly, take more beautiful photos and less Photoshop, and be healthy and beautiful. Thirdly, I have been holding back the fact that tomorrow is the birthday of the most beautiful woman in the world. That woman is my mother. I will call her tomorrow and tell her some mushy words. I won't say anything else. I don't know what good day tomorrow will be. I think it over and over again. Tomorrow is Saturday, a good day to rest. I will go out and drink with my friends. I am so happy. I wish you all a good weekend. Finally, I seriously recommend a new book, vivid and lively. The book number is 219-1385. The author is Zhu Jiaozhu. The quality of the book is guaranteed by books such as Shaoxian is Poisonous and Moving Mountains. I feel very comfortable and at ease when I recommend it. P.S. This is the revised version of 201112170114. I have corrected some typos and some terrible omissions. Haha. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 174. The senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain of the academy were either from isolated islands in the South Sea or other countries, or their families were far away. None of them were from Chang'an. After seeing second brother's fresh and pleasant little attendant, Ning Ke once thought of taking Sang Sang to live in the back mountain. However, he thought that he was just a newcomer in the academy and was not qualified to be compared with second brother. If he made such a request when he just entered the back mountain, it would make others feel that he was too arrogant. Secondly, the back mountain was beautiful but lacked the market atmosphere. Therefore, he became the only day student in the back mountain of the academy. Sang Sang hurriedly went to the West Lane to buy a lot of brushes, ink and strange materials according to the list he made. Then she began to cook and reported to him the business situation of the old brush pen shop today while cutting vegetables. Business is very good today, especially in the morning. The doorsill was almost trampled. Didn't I repair the door yesterday? But it was not strong enough, and today it was squeezed a little. After confirming that you are not at home, the number of customers decreased in the afternoon. Sang Sang suddenly thought of something. She wiped her wet hands on her apron and went back to the inner room to take out a thick stack of name cards and invitations. She put them on the desk and said, "A lot of people left these things and invited you to come to the mansion for a gathering. Because there were too many people and the names were written on the cards, I didn't write them down." Ning Kei glanced at the invitations and name cards, and then looked at the classics of Talisman which were as high as a hill. He thought that he was already very busy at this time. How could he have time to attend these appointments? After thinking for a while, he said to Sang Sang, "After dinner, you can choose these invitations and put the important ones aside to be dealt with later." "How? How to deal with them?" Sang Sang asked seriously. As Ning Kei's little handmaiden, she had never had the experience of dealing with these big shots of the empire and did not know which invitations were important. Choose them like vegetables. Keep the fresh and expensive ones, and put aside the stale and cheap ones. As for what is fresh and expensive, I have told you about the official system of the empire before. Do you still remember? Anything with a high official position is expensive. Let me handle it. I'll write a reply first to show my courtesy. I think those officials only want my words. Hearing his answer, Sang Sang frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Young master, your words can be sold for money now. Isn't it a pity to write a reply and send it back?" Ning Kei smiled and continued to concentrate on reciting what he saw in front of him. He had only read less than half of the dozens of thick classics of Talisman characters. He really had no time to think about other things. Master Yen Sei gave him a total of 33 ancient books of Talisman characters, which recorded the Talisman characters left by the previous Talisman masters. There were a total of 387 books of Talisman characters and 247 talismans, which was as vast as the sea. Ning Kei first skimmed through it roughly. He stared at those talismans that had different faces and seemed to have nothing in common with each other for a long time, but he found nothing. Instead, he frowned more and more. According to Master Yen Sei, these talismans were only for him to refer to and experience. As for how to finish the final stroke, it all depended on his own understanding. However, these ink balls looked like tadpoles, graffiti, raindrops, and silk lines, but they were not like words or paintings. How could he refer to and experience what he needed from them? He randomly picked out a book from the pile of ancient books and found that it was the first part of the third volume, which was the beginning of the water scroll. Ning Kei was slightly refreshed and thought that since it was the beginning, it probably had something to do with water. And water was the most indispensable and intimate thing for human survival. Perhaps it would be easier to experience it. There were 4 pages in the first part of the water scroll. Ning Kei carefully read from the beginning to the end and found that there were many similarities among more than 100 talismans drawn on the 4 pages. Most of them were 6 ink lines from top to bottom, but the thickness and the arrangement of the 6 ink lines were different. The strangest talismans were that the 6 ink lines were even completely entangled with each other. Are these all the characters of water? One is more than another. Ning Kei frowned and stared at the talisman at the top of the water scroll. He stared at the 6 neatly arranged ink lines with a slight bend in the middle. His mind gradually calmed down and the ink lines turned into streams of water in his eyes. He seemed to vaguely see rainwater sliding down from the eaves and falling into the rainwater accumulated on the bluestone slabs. Several raindrops bloomed and then merged with the surrounding rainwater again. There were materials such as writing brush, ink, and cinnabar on the desk. These things he ordered Sang Sang to buy were common and cheap, but according to Master Yen Sei, they were all necessary materials for writing talismans. Ning Kai no longer looked at the 6 ink lines on the book. He poured water into the inkstone and began to grind the ink blocks slowly. When the ink could no longer be separated, he took a brush from the shelf and gently dipped it into the inkstone to absorb the ink until it was full. His movements were gentle and calm, but in fact, he was making the psyche power in his sense of perception slowly cross the snow mountain and ocean of qi, pass through the paper window, and fall into the well in the small courtyard according to Master Yen Sei's teaching. He was carefully experiencing the primordial qi of water. He picked up the writing brush and took out the inkstone, but his wrist was stiff above the inkstone and he couldn't put the paper down. Ning Kai slightly frowned and looked at the 6 ink lines on the book again. He forcibly disassembled them in his sense of perception with the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. He only felt that the 6 ink lines suddenly separated and then quickly drifted away, turning into a dark rain cloud and shrouding his head. However, he didn't know why the dark rain cloud refused to drop a drop of water. His wrist slightly trembling, Ning Kai was ready to pick up the writing brush and put the paper down, but he finally stopped. He clearly felt that although he felt the well water and the meaning contained in the talisman, he still couldn't write his own talisman. He couldn't connect his own feeling with the water in the well. It was wrong after all. In the dead of night, the candlelight was gradually lit. There were 2 bowls of vegetables and a bowl of white rice on the desk. A bowl of water under the lamp was gently swaying in the night wind. Ning Kai stood by the window and the desk, looking at the talisman on the water scroll. His body was stiff and his right hand holding the writing brush trembled slightly. He had been in this position for a long time, but the writing brush in his hand still couldn't fall on the paper. Sang Sang sat by the bed and embroidered shoes. She looked up at him from time to time. She had already eaten a few hours ago, but she didn't ask Ning Kai to eat, because she knew that Ning Kai was in big trouble at this time. She knew that Ning Kai had started to work hard out of habit. Although she was worried, she was used to it, so she kept silent. Ning Kai had a very good but also very bad quality. Every time he encountered a problem that he was interested in and wanted to solve, he would put all his attention into the process of solving the problem. He couldn't sleep at all before he solved the problem. No matter how delicious the food was, it was as hard to chew as a candle in his mouth. He felt that the world around him didn't exist at all. In that world, he was regarded as a genius largely because he had the spirit to solve problems. However, this spirit was often a very troublesome thing for the people around him. Because he would forget to eat, he would not be able to sleep, he would torment his body until it was extremely weak, and even his life would be in danger. He would only wake up when he finally solved the problem, or when he regained his rationality and confirmed that the problem was beyond his ability. When Ning Kai saw the article on the response of the Tao for the first time in the frontier fortress, he didn't sleep for half a month. He forced himself to meditate all the time, so that he could feel the qi of heaven and earth around him. Sang Sang, who was still very young at that time, took care of him for half a month. In the end, even the former general of the city of Wei couldn't stand it and asked his soldiers to wake Ning Kai up with whips. After that, Ning Kai and Sang Sang both fell seriously ill. It was the same when he went to the old library at the beginning of last year. At that time, Ning Kai stayed up until he passed out and was thrown out of the building. He went home in a carriage with a pale face and vomited like a drunkard until he vomited blood. It was Sang Sang who guarded him by the bed every night. After finishing the embroidery, Sang Sang raised her head and rubbed her sore wrist. She glanced at Ning Kai, who was in a daze beside the desk, and then lowered her head to embroider the soles of shoes, hiding the worried look in the deepest part of her eyes. Over the years, she had been used to Ning Kai's crazy behavior when he solved problems. Over the years, Ning Ke had gotten used to having someone take care of him whenever he went crazy trying to solve problems. Late at night, the oil ran out, and the lights went out. Sang Sang, who had fallen asleep at the head of the bed, woke up. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the bright sky outside the window. She found that Ning Ke was still standing in front of the desk, still maintaining the posture of holding the brush pen. Sang Sang walked over and opened the window. She looked back at the desk and found that there was not even a dot of ink on the white paper. Ning Ke, who had been suffering for a whole night, was mentally exhausted and his dry eyes were bloodshot. Sang Sang stood by the window and stared at Ning Ke's eyes for a long time. She found that he could not see her at all. She shook her head and went out of the room to boil water for cooking. Ning Ke woke up from the state of mind when a steaming hot towel was placed on his face. He swayed and sat on the chair. He found that his whole body was sore and painful, as if he was rusty. After rubbing his face with hot water, brushing his teeth, eating and drinking a pot of hot tea, Ning Ke recovered a little. He picked up the water scroll from the desk and put it in his sleeve, ready to go to the academy. Standing in front of the old brush pen shop, he looked back at Sang Sang and said after a moment of silence, "The problem I encountered this time seems to be more troublesome than the previous ones. I may not be able to solve it even after a few nights. From tonight on, you don't have to stay up with me. Although I have not been sick for more than half a year, you still have to take care of your body. If I am sick, I still have you to take care of me. If we are sick, we can't ask Aunt Wu next door to take care of us." Sang Sang nodded. When he arrived at the academy, classes had already started in the study rooms. Ning Ke walked alone to the old library according to the route he took yesterday. He took a deep breath and walked into the fog in front of the mountain road. When he came out of the fog, it was still the clear morning light and the beautiful scenery of the cliff plateau. On the horse carriage from Chang'an to the academy, Ning Ke closed his eyes and rested all the way. He felt a little better and looked at the beautiful scenery. He held the book in his sleeve tightly and confidently thought that he could lie on the lawn for a while and then continue to read. The academy's back mountain was a wonderful place, which might be helpful for him to comprehend talisman Taoism. When he was about to step forward, he suddenly heard a clear and beautiful voice beside him. "Youngest brother. Ah, you come at the right time." Ning Ke turned his head and looked at seventh sister in the light yellow spring clothes of the academy. He hurriedly bowed respectfully and said, "Seventh sister." Seventh sister looked at his eyebrows and eyes curiously and asked with concern, "Why do you look so tired?" The biggest difference between a senior sister and a senior brother was that the senior sister was definitely a woman, and seventh sister was a very young and beautiful woman. No matter how old a man was, he would never admit that he was tired in front of a young and beautiful woman. So Ning Ke answered with a smile, "I entered the academy's back mountain yesterday and was a little excited, so I didn't sleep well." "Oh, then I don't need to worry about anything." Seventh sister took out a note from her sleeve and handed it to him. She said with a smile, "You know I'm responsible for the maintenance of the tactical array in the fog. This month is the day for major repairs and we need a lot of materials. So please go to the front yard to get some materials. You can go directly to Professor Wenlon." Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth and began to regret his answer when he thought of Chen Pippi's proud laughter yesterday. He answered with a bitter face, "Yes, seventh sister." "Hurry up." Seventh sister smiled and said with some embarrassment, "There are some materials for the cloth in the array that need to be changed later." "Youngest brother, please do it." Ning Ke opened his mouth wider and pointed at the thick fog behind him helplessly. He said, "Senior sister, do you mean I have to go into the fog to help you change the materials later? My eyesight is not good in the fog." Seventh sister covered her sleeves and smiled like a weak woman. She patted his chest heavily like a reckless man and said, "Since I need your help, how can I let you be a blind man? I have to check the situation in the array pivot and can't go by myself." I have to trouble you. I don't deserve to be called trouble. Ning Ke opened his eyes wide and said, or should I go to catch Chin Pippi first? It should be faster with two people. Youngest brother, although you were familiar with Pippi before you entered the mountain, he is your 12th senior brother after all. You should call him by his title. Seventh sister looked at him with a sweet smile and said, although the second floor of the academy is not as rigid and pedantic as those sects in the world, we still have to pay attention to things like respecting teachers and respecting Taoism and brothers and sisters. How could Ning Ke not understand the hidden meaning in senior sister's words? As the youngest brother who had just entered the second floor of the academy, how could he refuse? The next day, when Ning Ke came to the academy and entered the back mountain, he looked more haggard, his eyes more dry and bloodshot. He had not slept for 2 nights. Yesterday, he was ordered around the mountain by seventh sister like a coolie. Although it was the first time he had an intimate contact with the magic of the array in the fog, his spirit was extremely bad. Walking out of the mist, he thought of what seventh sister had said yesterday, which would take at least a month, and that it had to be finished before the headmaster and eldest brother returned. He felt cold all over. He lowered his body like a field mouse and slipped into the back of the mountain that was densely covered with the spring forest. After entering the back mountain, he did not take the ordinary mountain path but went to the dense forest. Seeing that the mirror-like lake on the cliff platform was getting smaller and smaller and the thread-like waterfall on the opposite cliff was getting thinner and thinner, he thought that seventh sister would not be able to find him. He could not help but feel relieved. He rubbed his tired and numb cheeks and leaned against an old pine behind him to look into the distance. It was very comfortable. Someone actually entered the mountain. It's you. Why are you here, youngest brother? Are you here to send us food? 2 vigorous and tired voices suddenly sounded from the side of the old pine. It was obviously 2 people talking, but their voices seemed to be mixed together, as if they were from the same mouth. Ning Ke was shocked and looked back in astonishment. He saw a stone table on the side of the old pine, and 2 men with long beards and messy hair sat opposite each other. It was already the end of spring, and even the mountain was warm. However, the 2 men sitting at the stone table were still wearing the thick winter clothes of the academy, and their clothes were full of stains. He did not know how long they had not been washed. He instantly guessed that these 2 must be the 5th brother and the 8th brother introduced by Chin Pippi. He forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart, bowed respectfully and said, Ning Ke greets you 2 senior brothers. Youngest brother, it's great that you are here. Come here quickly. A man with dirty hair and beard waved his hand tiredly and said. Ning Ke did not know whether he was 5th brother or 8th brother. Ning Ke walked over and found that the stone table was engraved with dense straight lines, which turned into a stone chessboard. There were dozens of black and white chess pieces on the chessboard, some in the east and some in the west. He could not see what was going on. At this moment, he was suddenly shocked. He looked down and saw that one of the senior brothers had put his hand into his arms. Senior brother, I'm your 8th brother. 8th brother, why do you put your hand into my arms? 8th brother took back his trembling hand and asked in confusion, Youngest brother, why don't you have any food with you? Ning Ke was speechless and thought, are you 2 children asking for candy every time you see someone? Youngest brother, no, 12th, he came to us the night before yesterday and told us that from now on, you are responsible for sending us meals. So he did not send us meals yesterday, and you did not come either. 8th brother looked at him pitifully and said in a trembling voice, Youngest brother, we have not eaten for 2 days and 2 nights. Why didn't you bring us any food today? Ning Ke opened his mouth wide but could not say a word. He thought, I have not slept for 2 days and 2 nights. Do I have to be responsible for your food? Although this was what he was thinking, looking at the 2 senior brothers beside the stone puppet with messy hair and hungry eyes, he felt like he was looking at 2 pitiful birds waiting to be fed. He really couldn't bring himself to do it, so he sighed and said, "Then I'll go find food for you." Fifth brother, who had been silent and only expressed his yearning for food with his eyes, suddenly became spirited when he heard that there would be food soon and they would not starve to death. He stroked his long beard and said seriously, "Hey, don't worry. You won't starve to death if you don't eat for a day." Eighth brother stretched out 3 fingers in front of fifth brother and said in a trembling voice, "You idiot, we have not eaten for 3 days." Fifth brother looked at Ning Kai and said seriously as if he did not see the 3 fingers in front of him, "Next game, you first." Eighth brother took back his fingers and nodded in agreement, "Good, good. This is serious." Ning Kai looked at the 2 senior brothers who were about to become hungry ghosts and thought speechlessly that they deserved to starve to death. On the 3rd day, when Ning Kai left the old brush pen temple on Lin 47th Street, the paper on the desk was still as white and clean as the first snow, without any ink stains. The morning light at the back of the mountain of the academy shone on his face, making his weariness and exhaustion in each of his eyebrows and increasingly bloodshot eyes clearer and more pitiful. He walked out of the clouds and walked to the mountain. Before he took 2 steps, he was blocked by a light yellow figure. 7th sister looked at him tenderly and said, "Youngest brother, I know you may have been busy yesterday, but you won't be too busy today, right?" Ning Kai looked at 7th sister, lifted the heavy food box in his right hand and said sadly, "Senior sister, I was dragged by 5th brother and 8th brother to play chess for a whole day yesterday. I am in a hurry to send them food, otherwise they will really starve to death." "I see." 7th sister slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Don't be delayed by those 2 idiots in cultivation. Playing chess and playing the zither is the end of cultivation after all. You can follow me to do a major repair of tactical arrays, which is good for your own cultivation." Ning Kai repeatedly agreed and promised to go to the lake pavilion to watch senior sister embroider as soon as he came down from the mountain. Then he would work hard to help senior sister to maintain the tactical array. Only then could he get away. But he thought in his heart that he would not go down the mountain later. "Let's see where you can find me." Under the pine tree, Ning Kai looked at the 2 senior brothers, who were so hungry that they could not even speak but were still staring at the chess pieces on the field. He put down the food box and said, "2 senior brothers, hurry up and eat." The food box was opened. The food sang cooked overnight was still warm and emitted a very faint fragrance. The 2 senior brothers trembled and sat up straight and began to eat. From time to time, they looked up at Ning Kai bitterly and sighed vaguely with regret. Youngest brother is really not hiding his weakness. He is really bad at chess. Youngest brother really didn't give way. He has never played chess at all. Yesterday, Ning Kai lost 12 games in a row under the pine tree. The 2 senior brothers finally confirmed that he was a lousy chess player without any foundation, so they no longer asked him to play chess. But for Ning Kai, this was a real blessing and he felt very comforted. After sending the food under the pine tree, he went to the depths of the clouds. He decided to take a rest or study the books left by Master Yen Sei during the half-day he stole. However, after a few steps, a person came out of the dense forest and flowers, grabbed his sleeve and asked, "Youngest brother, where are you from? Where are you going?" Ning Kai stared at the 11th brother whose head was full of broken flowers and suddenly had an impulse to cry. Fortunately, the 11th brother didn't ask who the youngest brother was, or he might faint on the spot. After a moment of silence, he shook off the 11th brother's wrist and rushed down the mountain, shouting, "7th sister, where are you? Let me help you." Between the lake pavilion at the foot of the mountain, the 7th sister's fingers holding the embroidery needle slightly stiffened. She looked up at the forest and thought in surprise, why is the new youngest brother so diligent? Compared with him, Pippi is totally a scum. In the small courtyard in front of the waterfall, the second brother slightly raised his eyebrows and praised the proud big white goose under the steps. The back of the mountain of the academy has been dull for many years, and the younger brothers and sisters are all shameless. Now there is finally a youngest brother who is devoted to Tao. How can I not be gratified? Behind a toilet somewhere in the mountain, Chen Pipi, who was biting a chicken leg, wiped his oily face and turned his head to the depths of the forest. He sighed in amazement. To please the senior sister, you even flatter her. Ning Ke, I'm really not as good as you. The sound of zither and flute in the dense forest of the cliff plateau gradually stopped, and a dialogue was heard. I suddenly remembered that we forgot one thing. Yes, we haven't invited the youngest brother to listen to the new song I composed last month. After entering the second floor of the academy, Ning Ke's life was very full, even to the point that he was about to die of exhaustion. The writing brush in the old brush pen shop had never been put down, and the snow-white paper was still snow-white. He couldn't fall asleep every night, and when he entered the academy in the morning, he had to send food and water to senior brother Songxia. If he didn't want to be caught by the 11th brother to discuss philosophy, he would be enslaved by the 7th sister and occasionally be forced to appreciate the new music composed by the 92 senior brothers. At that time, he sat in the long grass and nodded sleepily. Unexpectedly, in the eyes of the 2 senior brothers, it proved that he was quite talented in music. If he didn't hear the meaning of the music, why did the youngest brother nod and praise so frequently? The hot towel Sang Sang handed to him was getting hotter and hotter, but it still couldn't wash away his fatigue. Floating in the vast and mysterious world of talisman Taoism day and night, exhausted by the senior brothers and sisters of the academy, Ning Ke's eyes were as red as a net, and his eyelids were like mountains. His eyes were dull, and his exposed fingers kept drawing Fu characters in the air, copying the tens of thousands of characters he had memorized in his mind. He looked like a fool. In the meadow of the academy, Chu Yuxian looked at the miserable Ning Ke and said in shock, "How did you become like this?" Situelan and Jean Wuxia handed over the mansion's invitation cards to invite him for a chat on behalf of the elders of their family. Hearing Chu Yuxian's words, they noticed that Ning Ke looked extremely haggard and couldn't help but be shocked. Ning Ke took the 2 invitation cards and put them in his arms. He looked numb with hands folded in front, and then walked to the back of the mountain, looking a little lost. The 3 of them looked at Ning Ke's slowly walking back and were shocked speechless for a long time. Situelan shook her head hard to drive Ning Ke's ghost-like face out of her mind. She murmured, "Is there a ghost on the 2nd floor, shit? You saw a ghost." Chen Pipi was so scared that he directly jumped back 20 meters, and then hesitated for a long time before walking back. He looked at Ning Ke's face and was shocked speechless. Ning Ke said weakly, "You are the one who saw a ghost." Chen Pipi nodded and said seriously, "Yes, you do look like a ghost now." Ning Ke looked at the forest with a dull look and said, "I did see a ghost. I saw 2 ghosts in the back of the mountain of the academy who only knew how to play chess and even wanted to be fed. 2 ghosts who only knew how to play flute and zither purely for their own amusement. They couldn't even see that I was asleep, but they insisted that I sit there and listen to them. And a philosophical ghost who caught people and asked those **t questions. Then he turned his head to look at Chen Pipi and said painfully, "And you unfaithful coward. I know this is an inhuman life, but don't forget that I have been living like this for several years." Chen Pipi looked at Ning Ke and answered timidly, "But no matter how hard it was, I didn't become like you now. What on earth has caused you to become like this?" "I am learning talisman Taoism from Master Yen Sei." Ning Ke looked at him with a perplexed expression and said, "But after learning for so long, I still can't figure out the way. This thing is too difficult, and it's so difficult that I have no direction and no brain. That's why I'm not happy. Have you used the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong? I have tried everything, but I still can't find the way." Ning Ke slowly lowered his head and said tiredly, "I actually have the feeling of fear and despair. Do you know? This is the first time in my life that I feel hopeless in learning." Chen Pipi thought of Ning Ke's desperate look when he was cultivating and nodded subconsciously. Ning Ke shook his head and said, even when I found that I couldn't cultivate in the city of Wei, I was not as desperate and wanted to give up as I am now. Because when I fell asleep, I always felt that I was meditating. But now facing those classics of talisman, even if I enter a sleep-like state of meditation, I still clearly know that I can't do it. Chen Pipi looked at his haggard cheeks and dim eyes and suddenly said, I will take you to a place to see a person. Ning Ke asked, where? To see who? Don't let 11th brother hear your two questions. Chen Pipi joked. Ning Ke wanted to laugh when he heard this, but he was too tired to raise his eyebrows. Chen Pipi looked at his pitiful look and sighed. He grabbed his sleeve and walked to somewhere in the back mountain. When they came to a cliff, Chen Pipi stopped and looked at him. He said, last time when you reached the top, you saw an old man. You thought he was also senior brother, but he was not. Ning Ke thought of the old man and asked, you said you didn't know how to call him. Chen Pipi said, I really don't know how to call him. That old man entered the back mountain of the academy very early, even earlier than eldest brother and second brother. We should call him Uncle Master, but the headmaster said that this old man was not a member of the academy. Suddenly, Ning Ke thought of many hidden side bosses in stories, such as the great wise man who pointed out the right path for the hero. He suddenly became excited and stared at Chen Pipi. He said, this old man, is good at talisman Taoism. No. Chen Pipi shook his head and said, this old man doesn't know talisman Taoism. He doesn't know any cultivation methods. Ning Ke stared at Chen Pipi and asked, then why did you bring me to see him? You said that this is the first time in your life that you are afraid of difficulties and want to give up. Then let me ask you, do you like cultivation? After a long silence, Ning Ke firmly answered, I like it. Chen Pipi looked at him and said, since you like it, you should stick to it. I brought you to see this old man because I want you to see that a person who is really obsessed with something will never give up easily. Since that old man can't cultivate, then what is he obsessed with? What does he like? Reading. Chen Pipi emphasized and said, he likes reading. This chapter has 8,000 words, so it takes a long time to write. I wish I could finish it in an hour. But it's really a fool's dream. But a fool is always cute. Haha. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Because he is anxious, I am anxious, and the world seems to be anxious too. Master Yen Sei looked up at the northern sky outside the southern gate temple and said slowly, 10 years to become a divine talisman master. My student's ambition is more than that, and so am I. Since the world has begun to be turbulent, I think it will be difficult to leave a stable and conservative cultivation environment for Ning Quebec. Most importantly, I have recently found that time is running out. Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei's old face. After a long time of silence, he said sadly, I see. Looking at Master Yen Sei's old back, Li Qingshan suddenly said, Senior brother, don't go to play these days. Stay in the temple and talk with me. We have been in the same school for decades, but we haven't even played a game of chess. Master Yen Sei did not look back. He smiled and waved his hand. He said in a hoarse voice, you are not a young and beautiful girl. It is really boring to talk and play chess with you. Don't worry, I will come back to see you for the last time when I die. Master Yen Sei did not look back. He smiled and waved his hand. He said in a hoarse voice, you are not a young and beautiful girl. It is really boring to talk and play chess with you. Don't worry, I will come back to see you for the last time when I die. Li Qingshan withdrew his gaze and looked at the small teapot on the stove beside the table that spurted out steam. He was speechless. He thought, Senior brother, since you've decided on making a stove to boil tea, all I can do is think of some ways to help this little guy. After Master Yen Sei left South School Temple of Haotian Taoism, he went directly to the House of Red Sleeves and came to the small courtyard that he was most familiar with. Dewdrop was counting the silver notes with her maidservant at this time. They really made a small fortune by selling the rubbing of chicken soup calligraphy these days. Suddenly they heard the sound of the door and saw the dirty old Taoist standing at the gate of the courtyard. She immediately got up in surprise. In the past, she only thought this old Taoist looked wretched and generous, so she treated him patiently. Now she already knew his real identity. She did not dare to act coquettishly and hurried to greet him as fast as she could. "Master Taoist is here." Dewdrop squatted and bowed, which was very respectful. She thought she should be more enthusiastic, but she was really nervous because this old Taoist was a legendary immortal. Master Yen Sei laughed strangely and pinched her plump waist. He said, "You know my identity, but you don't need to be so nervous. After all, I still have to pay, so I should please you." Dewdrop took the opportunity to snuggle into his arms and said shyly, "Master Taoist, you are making fun of me again. I thought you are a free man, and immortals will not stay in the mortal world for too long. I am afraid that I will never see you again. I am full of regret." Master Yen Sei said angrily, "Your cosmetics here taste better than the ink on the fu paper. How can I not come here?" After a few steps to the cliff, they saw a cliff cave about dozens of meters high. Birds were flying in and out of the cave quickly. On the gentle slope outside the cliff cave, there was a two-story wooden building. The surface of the building was mottled by wind and rain and bird droppings. No one knew how many years it had been standing under the cliff. Ning Kei smelled a familiar smell when he was still some distance away from the building. He asked with a pale face, "Do you smell it here?" Chen Pipi sniffled and said blankly, "What smell? You can't smell such a strong smell." Ning Kei stared at his eyes and said in a trembling voice, "The smell of Huangzhou bud paper and ink makes me want to vomit. Why do you bring me here?" Chen Pipi knew that there must be paper and ink beside the old scholar in the building, but he did not smell the smell of paper and ink that made Ning Kei pale and nauseous. He reached out his hand in front of his nose and thought that this lad had been studying talisman Taoism so crazily that he was so sensitive. Ning Kei raised his sleeves to cover his nose and followed him to the wooden building. The closer they were to the wooden building, the stronger the smell of paper and ink was, which made him more and more uncomfortable. Recently, he had been grinding ink and reading paper every night, but he could not move a stroke. Subconsciously, he had a great fear and disgust for this smell. There was an open-air stone platform under the wooden building, on which there was a huge desk, on which there were piles of books. Behind the mountainous books, sat an old scholar with gray hair. The old scholar held an old book in his left hand and a half-bald writing brush in his right hand. From time to time, he recited a few sentences to the old book and wrote some numbers on the paper. Then he continued to read. No one knew what he saw, but his long eyebrows flew up in the wind, and his facial expressions were extremely wonderful, as if he was about to dance. The old man read and copied the book, concentrating on nothing else. Whether it was the flock of birds above the cliff cave or Chen Pipi and Ning Kei who were approaching, they did not affect him at all. It seemed that as long as he started to read, the whole world except for the book would disappear in an instant. Wonderful! Wonderful! The old scholar found another wonderful place in the scroll. Using his fastest speed, he copied the sentences on the paper. Then he put the half-bald brush pen in his mouth and licked it, as if he had tasted the most delicious taste in the world. Unexpectedly, he was so happy that he danced with joy. Ning Kei looked at the old scholar and turned back to look at Chen Pipi in astonishment. He said, "He is indeed reading, but how can watching him read help me to cultivate talisman Taoism?" Eldest brother once told us that many years ago, the headmaster of the academy found that the old man actually had a great potential for cultivation, but was directly rejected by the old man. Pippi looked at the old man who was crazily reading and copying books behind the desk. He shrugged helplessly and said, because in this old man's opinion, reading is the only meaningful thing in the world. Cultivation and whatnot is just a waste of time. The old man can't do anything except reading, and he also disdains to do anything. Even the headmaster of the academy can't do anything to him. Besides, he is very grumpy. As long as someone disturbs his reading, he will be very unhappy. After such a long time, no one in the back mountain pays attention to him. Even eldest brother, who has the best temper, doesn't want to deal with this person. Ning Kei looked at the old man behind the mountain of books and said sympathetically, this is probably because reading is pedantic. You're too polite. Pippi shook his head and said, after the old man refused the headmaster of the academy's request to take him to cultivate, second brother once said that this man has become an idiot because of reading. Ning Kei smiled, but the smile froze on his face in an instant. He turned back to look at Pippi and asked hesitantly, wait. Today you specially brought me to see this old man who has become an idiot because of reading. Do you want to use this example to tell me that I have been studying talisman Taoism crazily these days, and I will eventually become an idiot like him if I go on like this? Just the opposite. Pippi led him to the stone platform and said, although we all hate this old man, we also admire him very much. I brought you to see him because I want to tell you that you think you can look down on your peers with perseverance and diligence, but in fact, there are many people in this world who can do it, and they can do it better than you. Ning Kei was a little confused and followed him to the stone platform. He suddenly thought of something and asked, besides this old man, is there anyone in the back mountain of the academy who has a higher seniority? Do we have an uncle? There used to be a youngest uncle, who was said to be the most vigorous person in the world. Pippi turned back and said, but unfortunately, only eldest brother and second brother have seen him. On the stone platform, Pippi bowed to the old man behind the mountain of books and said with a smile, scholar, long time no see. Ning Kei followed him and bowed. He couldn't help but feel a little funny when he heard the title of scholar. The scholar turned a deaf ear, as if he didn't see them coming to him. Pippi said loudly again, scholar. Long time no see. His voice came from the side of the building into the cliff cave. After several echoes, it seemed to be particularly clear and loud, which scared the birds who were busy building nests or doing other household chores above the cliff cave and made them fly all over the sky and scream. Only then did the scholar wake up. He raised his head in confusion and looked at the two people who had appeared in front of the desk. Suddenly, his expression stiffened and his eyes revealed a look of disgust. He shouted in a hoarse voice, "What are you doing here again? Go away. Don't disturb my reading again." Pippi glanced at Ning Kei and shrugged his shoulders. Then he said to the scholar with a smile, "I brought my younger brother here to show you. What's there to see? Your younger brother is not a book." The scholar reached out and wiped the floating gray hair on his face to the back. He looked at Pippi and said angrily, "Last time you said that the academy wanted to accept a younger brother and that an elder should be present to show solemnity. You had to trick me to stay on the top of the mountain for a whole night. Why is there another younger brother this time? Do you want to trick me to stay on the top of the mountain for a whole night again? Oh, God! Oh, Earth!" He looked at Pippi as if he had killed his father. His expression was extremely disgusted and his eyes were full of hidden bitterness. He shouted, "Do you know how many books I have to read in one night?" Pippi said angrily, "You brought 7 books to the top of the mountain that day. Are they not enough for you to read? There is no light on the top of the mountain. The starlight on the top of the mountain is brighter than the light. Reading is either done with sunlight or light. How can the starlight be used? Why can't the starlight be used? I don't feel anything. Is it a book or a feeling that you are reading? Idiot! Of course you have to feel something when reading to be happy. Idiot! You can feel something when you are in love under the starlight. Why can't you feel anything when reading? The two were shouting and spitting at each other by the desk. Ning Kai had long been dumbfounded listening to them. At this time, he believed that the scholar was really the kind of person who was pedantic and that the senior brothers in the backyard of the academy really did not respect this person. The scholar was so angry that his face turned red and his chest kept heaving. He was old and weak, so he was obviously no match for Chen Pipi in a quarrel. Moreover, he quickly realized that Chen Pipi specially came to quarrel with him today. His purpose was very obvious, which was to distract him from reading. He thought that he had guessed Chen Pipi's sinister intention, so how could he let him succeed? I don't want to talk to you anymore. He said sadly, how can I finish so many books if I don't hurry up? Do you know what you are doing? You are killing my life and destroying my life. After saying this, the scholar really ignored Chen Pipi's verbal attack and lowered his head to concentrate on reading and copying books. Ning Kai looked at the densely packed books on the bookshelves in the building and frowned slightly. He said, although there are many books here, if he concentrates on reading, he can finish them in a few years. Even with the books in the old library of the academy, it should not make him so miserable. Hearing this, Chen Pipi shook his head with a bitter smile and led him to the cliff cave. The cliff cave was strangely kept dry. There were some faint cracks in the rocks at the top, so it did not seem dark. There were even some unknown trees in the cave, with birds flying around and singing in the treetops. Ning Kai's eyes looked around the cave and then fell on the cliff wall. His body suddenly became stiff and he could no longer speak. There were many wooden shelves on the cliff. It looked like a bookshelf that had been magnified countless times. There were no nests, no treasures, no statues, no potted plants on these wooden shelves. There was only one thing. That was books. Innumerable books. A whole cliff wall of books. Books all over the mountain and wilderness. Since the academy was founded, it has never stopped collecting books. For thousands of years, it has collected countless books from ancient times to today. All of them are here. Therefore, the pain of a scholar is actually really painful. Chen Pipi glanced at Ning Kai and looked at the densely packed books on the cliff wall that were tens of meters high. He sighed and said, if knowledge can be measured by the number of books, then at least 7 out of 10 knowledge in the world is in the academy. In Ning Kai's eyes, the whole cliff wall of books was as shocking as the sea of ink standing up on the mountain road. It was so heavy that he could hardly breathe. After a long time, he barely woke up. He climbed up along the steep ropeway on the edge of the cliff cave and came to the third layer of the cliff wall bookshelf. He walked along the wooden board that could only allow one person to pass through for more than 10 meters. Then he stopped and looked back at the densely packed books close at hand. Gradually, a strong doubt arose in his heart. If these books had been collected since thousands of years ago, why were they only slightly yellowed and not weathered after such a long time? What was even more strange was that there was not much dust on these open-air books. Chen Pipi probably guessed his doubt and said with a smile, when you reach a certain state, you will probably know that it is actually very easy to remove dust. You only need to lift your finger and the wind in the cliff cave will do it for you. Ning Kai suddenly understood and then suddenly thought that if Sang Sang could cultivate, wouldn't it be much easier for her to do housework? As he thought about it, he randomly took out a book and found 4 words written on the cover, miscellaneous notes of the 2 capitals. Thinking that it might be a scholar's notebook, he opened it and didn't expect to see such words as, white buttocks, whipping, spitting tongue, and newly peeled. He couldn't help but become slightly stiff. He asked in surprise, you even collect erotic books? Chen Pipi replied, the headmaster of academy said that it is beneficial to read books. How can you judge a book by its theme? You have dog sh*t in your heart and see everything as dog sh*t. Your heart is full of lust and you can also be distracted by the 7 tomes of arcane. Just don't read them as erotic books. Looking at the solemn expression on his fat face, Ning Kai couldn't help but feel great admiration and sincerely asked, "Then what do you think you're reading?" "Me?" Chen Pippi waved his sleeves and calmly said, "My state is not high enough and I'm still at the stage of seeing mountains as mountains. Erotic books are naturally erotic books. This kind of thing doesn't need to be forced." Looking at him, Ning Kai sighed and said nothing more. The whole cliff wall and the seemingly endless books were undoubtedly a great treasure for a person who loved reading and even regarded reading as the only important thing in his life. But at the same time, it was also a great sorrow. Because reading endless books in a limited life was after all an impossible task. Walking out of the cliff cave, Ning Kai looked at the old scholar who was holding a scroll, copying from time to time, chanting from time to time, sometimes sad, sometimes angry, and sometimes happy. Ning Kai found that he somewhat understood why the old scholar was so extreme and anxious. Walking to the desk, Ning Kai bowed deeply to the old scholar and sincerely asked, "Uncle, what should I do if I can't finish reading all the books? Don't you feel desperate? Why do you still keep reading?" He didn't call him a scholar like Chen Pippi, but called him Uncle Master instead. This was because he was older and had entered the mountain earlier. More importantly, Ning Kai had an inexplicable sense of respect for people who had perseverance to do things to the extreme. Perhaps he heard the sincerity in Ning Kai's tone, or perhaps he noticed that Ning Kai was similar to him in some aspects. The old scholar didn't impatiently wave his hand to drive him away this time, but slowly put down the scroll in his hand. He recalled, "I forgot when I started to study in the mountain, but I remember that when I was 20 years old, I thought it was possible for me to read all the books in the world." Ning Kai listened in silence. The scholar leisurely said, "But when I was 50 years old, I found that it was impossible. Because in the process of reading, there were people in the world who kept writing books. And because of my old age and weakness, my reading speed became slower and slower. What was more terrible was that I forgot all the books I read when I was young." He looked at Ning Kai's eyes and smiled, "If you forgot all the books you read, how could you say that you have read them? So I had to pick up the books I had forgotten and read them again. And in order not to forget again, I began to extract." Ning Kai asked, "But wouldn't it be slower in this way?" "Yes." The scholar sighed and said, "So I have long known that I can't read all the books in the world in this life, even the books in the academy." Ning Kai slightly frowned and asked, "Then aren't you very disappointed?" "More than disappointed, completely desperate." The scholar shook his head and said, "On the day when I confirmed that I couldn't read all the books in the academy, I felt that the whole world had collapsed. I didn't want to eat or sleep, and even I didn't want to read anymore." A person who could do nothing and didn't want to do anything except reading, unexpectedly didn't want to read anymore. It could be imagined how much the old scholar had suffered on that day. Ning Kai naturally thought of his mental state these days. After a moment of silence, he sincerely asked, "Uncle, then how did you pass that hurdle?" "Because I asked myself a question." The scholar said, "Do you like reading books, or do you like reading all the books?" I didn't think for too long, and I got the answer. In the end, what I like is still studying. I am 102 years old this year, and I may close my eyes and never wake up again any day. But I can never be sure that I will die on that day. So as long as I keep reading, it doesn't matter if I can't finish reading. I can still comfort myself and confirm that I am doing what I want to do every minute and second before I die, which makes me happy and satisfied. Do you like cultivation, or do you like killing people after reaching a certain realm? I need to think about this question carefully." Walking on the mountain road at the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Kai recalled the conversation he had with the old scholar outside the cliff cave. He vaguely understood something very important. Listening to the music coming from somewhere on the cliff plateau, he slowly stopped walking. Chen Pippi, who had been silent for a long time, looked at him and asked, "Have you thought it through?" "I've thought it through. In the end, I still like to cultivate. Ning Ke listened to the melodious music and thought about these days in the academy's back mountain. The two Shixiang who were obsessed with chess and starving under the pine tree, the two Shixiang who were obsessed with zither and flute, the 11th Shixiang who had a head full of flowers and looked like a madman but was quiet and at ease, the Shishu who studied outside the cliff cave until he was 100 years old and still danced with joy. Chapter 176. Chen Pipi sincerely praised him, that's a good sentence. Ning Ke shrugged and said, I often say beautiful words that even I don't expect. The two looked at each other and then laughed. The melodious music floating on the cliff platform had stopped. Ning Ke got a temporary answer to the problem of obsession and happiness in life, and he was no longer as anxious and impetuous as before. He and Chen Pipi walked down the hill side by side, wondering if they should go to the old library for a nap. After returning to Lin 47th Street, perhaps he could take Sang Sang to go shopping and relax. Unexpectedly, the dense forest beside the road shook, and two people came out of it. Fortunately, there were two people who appeared, so it could not be the most helpless and painful 11th senior brother. Unfortunately, these two people were carrying a zither and a flute in their arms. Their academy uniforms were wide and large. They were Beigong and Shimen, the two senior brothers who were obsessed with music. Youngest brother, I saw that you didn't nod frequently when listening to the song yesterday, so I guessed that there must be something wrong with the song. Ninth brother Beigong Weiyang's eyes were also bloodshot. He pulled Ning Ke's sleeve enthusiastically and said, Last night, Shimen and I stayed up all night and made some adjustments to the 3 connecting bars of the song. We are satisfied with it, but it's a song made by ourselves after all. It doesn't count if you're deaf and blind. We still need you to appreciate it. 10th brother Shimen Buhua held the zither and said sincerely, Youngest brother, thank you for your hard work. Chen Pipi looked at Ning Ke sympathetically and thought that Ning Ke had just figured out those things on the spiritual level, but the chores around him were bothering him. As the youngest person in the back mountain of the academy, it was so painful that it made him want to cry. Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He looked at the two senior brothers in front of him and thought of the old man who was focused on reading beside the cliff cave. After a moment of silence, he smiled and bowed with hands folded in front and said calmly, Two senior brothers, please forgive me for not listening to the song today. What can you do if you don't listen to the song? Are those guys asking you to play chess and debate? Beigong Weiyang flicked his sleeves and said unhappily, Little brother, don't make things difficult for yourself. I will stand up for you. Don't they know how precious your time is? Hearing this, Ning Ke couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head and said, Ninth brother, I won't listen to music or play chess today, nor will I accompany 11th brother in his mental wandering. I just want to have a good sleep. Beigong Weiyang widened his eyes and asked in confusion, Little junior brother, why aren't you listening to music? Ning Ke replied gently, Because I don't like it. Beigong Weiyang was stunned. Stroking the bamboo flute in his hand, he said in distress, I can't. You seemed very happy listening to it the last few times. Ning Ke said with a smile, That's to make my two senior brothers happy. In fact, I'm not that happy myself. Senior brother Shimen Buhua interrupted, Little junior brother, you kept nodding your head while listening to the music. Ning Ke sighed and said, I was so sleepy that I wanted to sleep. Chen Pipi couldn't help but be dumbfounded at the conversation between Ning Ke and his two senior brothers. He gently pulled Ning Ke's sleeves and pulled him aside. He reminded him in a low voice, How can you talk to your senior brothers like this? Don't say it if you don't like it. Ning Ke looked at him and said in distress, But I'm telling the truth. At this moment, a calm and serious voice came from the top of the mountain path. Hearing this voice, both the two senior brothers who were in a daze and Chen Pipi who was ready to continue to criticize and remind Ning Ke became more obedient in an instant. Don't listen to it if you don't like it. Speak the truth and deal with things straightforwardly. That's what a gentleman should do. Second brother, who was wearing an ancient crown, walked down from the top of the mountain path with a solemn expression. He nodded slightly and greeted his junior brothers. Then he said with an undisguised expression of admiration, "Little junior brother is quite a gentleman. You should learn from him." Hearing the praise, Ning Ke was stunned. This was the first time that he was associated with such a strange creature as a gentleman. Second brother looked at him with a smile and nodded. Then he stopped smiling and looked seriously at Chen Pipi and the other two junior brothers. He said in a low voice, "From today on, no one is allowed to disturb little junior brother's cultivation. Otherwise, I'll punish you according to the academy rules." His voice was not very loud, but it seemed to have a substantial existence. It did not dissipate even though it floated far away. Along with the mountain forest wind, it quickly spread through the whole back of the mountain and spread to the lake pavilion under the pine trees and flowers. All the junior brothers and sisters could hear it clearly. Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua agreed with a bitter face. But they could not help sneaking a glance at Ning Quebec. They were probably still regretting that they had finally found a junior brother who was sensitive to the beauty of rhythm, but he was taken away by second brother. Eldest brother ranked first in the back of the mountain of the academy. However, eldest brother's temperament was extremely gentle. The junior brothers and sisters were close to him without fear. What they really respected was this upright and serious second brother. As long as second brother said it, no one dared to disobey. Thinking that Ning Ke would not need to be bothered by these senior brothers and sisters from now on, and thinking of his bloody life when he just entered the back of the mountain, Chen Pipi was very envious of his luck. He was a little angry and unreconciled. He looked at second brother and asked seriously, "Senior brother, the array of the cloud gate is now being repaired, and seventh sister needs Ning Ke's help every day. What do you think?" There was an unfinished meaning in his words, which implied that he was up to no good. Ning Ke glared at Chen Pipi, and Chen Pipi looked back at him proudly. However, he did not feel proud for long. The next moment, he heard second brother's words and understood that talking too much often brought great misfortune to people. The array of the cloud gate has not been repaired yet. What has seventh sister been doing in the past 6 months? Practicing the array. Well, it is indeed a little troublesome. Little junior brother has just entered the sect and has no time to waste on these things. Pipi, I remember that you repaired the array of the cloud gate with seventh sister the year before last. Since you have experience, you have to work hard this year. Chen Pipi opened his mouth wide and wanted to cry but had no tears. Little junior brother, come with me. Second brother put his sleeves behind his back and walked down the mountain slowly. Ning Ke patted Chen Pipi's shoulder sympathetically and caught up with him. In the chat with Chen Pipi and other senior brothers and sisters, Ning Ke knew that second brother was an extremely proud and serious person. He was very strict to himself and others, so he was a little afraid of him. However, today second brother solved a big problem for him, so his impression of second brother suddenly changed. He felt that second brother was definitely the most lovely person in the world. The psychological state would definitely affect the reality. He followed second brother slowly to the mirror lake on the cliff plateau. Looking at second brother's old-fashioned posture and the rigid taste of the same distance in every step, all changed into admirable rigorous self-discipline. Even the high crown on second brother's head, which was like a washing stick, became a lot more noble at this time. Second brother suddenly sighed with emotion and said, "Your state is really too low." Hearing second brother's words in front of him, Ning Ke quickly quickened his pace and came behind him. He answered honestly, "Yes." The back of the mountain of the academy has no experience in the education of disciples in the no-doubt state. Second brother shook his head slowly and said, although eldest brother was still in the initial state when he entered the academy, he was taught by the headmaster himself. But now the headmaster and eldest brother are still traveling outside, even I don't know how to teach you. Ning Ke was silent. Hearing that second brother was going to teach the new youngest brother Haran sword, the back mountain of the academy, which had been quiet for a long time, finally ushered in a rare bustle. Those senior brothers and sisters who usually lived in different places all came out of their rooms under the pine trees and flowers. They stood everywhere on the cliff plateau and curiously looked at the two people by the mirror lake, pointing at them and whispering from time to time. Beigong Weiyang squatted under the bamboo forest and looked at the two who were talking by the lake. He could not help but shake his head and said, "What's so good about learning flying sword? It has no sense of beauty at all. What else can it do except to kill people?" Fifth brother and eighth brother came out of the bamboo forest with chess boxes in their arms. Fifth brother ruthlessly slapped Beigong's head and scolded, "The tiger is quite beautiful. Why don't you go to hug and kiss it? The difference between a man and a beast is not beauty, but wisdom. What future can he have if he learns to play the flute from you?" Fifth brother looked at the lake and shook his head disapprovingly, saying, "Youngest brother has really gone astray by learning flying sword from second brother. If he learns chess with us, even if he can't become a national player, he can at least gain some wisdom." Beigong Weiyang looked at him angrily and said, "Fifth brother, wisdom is not violence. You don't have to hit my head even if you don't agree with me." Fifth brother glared at him and said, "I am your senior brother. Are you not convinced that I hit you?" Beigong Weiyang moved aside and muttered, "Of course I am. How dare I not? But since it is second brother who wants youngest brother to learn flying sword, don't complain here." Not to mention those who looked gloomy all over the cliff plateau, some of whom, like 11, beat their chests and stamped their feet, thinking that their youngest brother had been led astray by second brother. Second brother and Ning Ke were having a serious conversation by the mirror lake, wrapped in the gentle wind of late spring. Although you have read Wu Zhenyang's theory on Haran sword, this monograph was written by Mr. Wu, a former sage of the academy in his later years. Its main purpose is to explore the interaction and conflict between Haran sword and heaven and earth. Second brother looked at Ning Ke and said, "This book focuses more on the Tao outside the Tao, which is not something you can fully grasp with your current state. So since you want to learn Haran sword, you have to learn from the most basic things." Ning Ke bowed with hands folded in front and said, "Second brother, please enlighten me. Flying sword is a sword that can fly without human control." Second brother said calmly. Second brother is really good at talking nonsense. Ning Ke couldn't calm down and thought silently in his heart. Controlling the chi of heaven and earth with psyche power, touching and controlling the sword body invisibly, and moving the sword around the body is the simplest way of flying sword. The power of flying sword lies in 3 points: the strength of the sword master's psyche power, the amount of chi of heaven and earth that can be controlled, the strength of the connection with the sword body, the strength of the sword body itself, and the subtlety of the flying sword body. You are still in the no-doubt state, but you can already touch and even control foreign objects, which shows that your psyche power is strong enough and the connection with foreign objects is good. But there is another point based on talent, that is, the amount of chi of heaven and earth that you can control. Second brother looked at his eyes and said calmly, "You can see the amount of chi of heaven and earth that a sword master can control as an invisible rope in his hand. The more chi of heaven and earth you can control, the stronger and longer the invisible rope will be. Only a rope that is strong and long enough can drive the sword body to fly a longer distance without worrying about getting out of control." Ning Ke said, "I understand." Second brother looked at him and said, "The so-called swordsmanship is actually a different way of controlling the chi of heaven and earth with psyche power to control the sword body. The Haran sword would rather take the straight than seek the crooked one. It emphasizes on having a firm heart and a firm will. You can use the sword without hesitation and break all obstacles. As for how to do it, you should listen to the Haoran sword tactics that I will teach you. Thank you, senior brother. Do you remember it? I remember half of it. Then I will say it again. Yes. Ning Ke suddenly felt that this dialogue was very familiar and thought that he had to answer that he had forgotten all of it later. Then second brother brushed his academy uniform and laughed loudly, saying, "Little younger brother, you have understood it. Then go to the dark side and kill all the thieves." Second brother frowned and asked, "What about now?" Ning Ke came to his senses and of course did not dare to answer like that. He answered honestly, "I remember all of it." Second brother's eyebrows gradually relaxed and he praised, "Little younger brother's comprehension is really excellent." As soon as he finished speaking, he casually waved his hand in the spring breeze by the lakeside and a short and thin wooden sword without a handle appeared in his hand. He handed the hiltless wooden sword to Ning Ke and said, "I have said before that we should start from the most basic. Show me your sword first." Ning Ke took the hiltless wooden sword and felt a little cold in his fingers. For a moment, he was a little confused. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and said, "Okay." The disciples of the second floor of the academy who were watching around the mirror lake saw that Ning Ke was finally going to show his sword. They all stood up and watched with curiosity on their faces. Although at this moment they still insisted that it was a very wrong choice for Ning Ke to learn the flying sword, which was neither beautiful nor wise to kill people, they were also very curious about Ning Ke's level. Ning Ke slowly closed his eyes and felt the weight of the hiltless wooden sword in his hands. He felt that the originally light wooden sword was getting heavier and heavier. The psyche power in his sense of perception was driven out of his body and blended with the surrounding chi of heaven and earth. It vaguely touched the place where the wooden sword was and then wrapped the chi of heaven and earth around it according to the method taught by second brother. Up. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at the hiltless wooden sword in his hand. He shouted in a low voice and the psyche power in his sense of perception gushed out. The chi of heaven and earth wrapped around the sword suddenly tightened and then violently vibrated. In the spring breeze by the mirror lake, a thin hiltless wooden sword trembled and flew up. The thin hiltless wooden sword flew very slowly and trembled uneasily, as if it was extremely frightened. The wooden sword moved slowly in the air and it was very difficult and strenuous to fly. Moreover, the wooden sword moved without any regular trajectory. One moment it was on the right side of Ning Ke's body, and the next moment it was on the left side of Ning Ke's body. One moment it jumped up, and the next moment it was about to fall into the lake. The wooden sword stopped in the air and looked like an old woman with small feet without a sense of direction. The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy who were watching by the lake opened their mouths wide and could not close them for a long time. The embroidery needle between seventh sister's fingers in the pavilion at the center of the lake fell into the lake and was swallowed by a greedy golden carp. Beigong Weiyang stood at the edge of the bamboo forest and looked at the hiltless wooden sword in the air by the lake. He said with a serious expression, "I think the sword will feel ashamed to use the word fly to describe this sword." Chen Pipi, who was standing not far away, lowered his head in shame and did not want to admit that the person by the lake was his friend. The hiltless wooden sword flew back, trembling. Ning Ke opened his eyes wide and saw that it was about to fall. He stretched out his hand like lightning and caught it in his hand. He could not help but feel a little scared. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and turned to second brother and asked excitedly, "Senior brother, what do you think of me?" The excitement on his face was genuine. In fact, in order to suppress the pride in his heart, he had already used a lot of strength, because he had already given it his all. Moreover, this was indeed the best flight he had ever flown, if things like silver were excluded. Second brother looked at him in a daze and said after a long silence, "Youngest brother, you still can't cultivate your natal item. It's not easy for you to do this. Practice slowly and try your best. You will succeed." After saying this, second senior brother left the lake without looking back. Ning Ke looked at second brother's back in shock and then noticed that those senior brothers and sisters by the lake began to drill into the forest again and shook their heads as they walked. He grabbed sixth brother who did not have time to leave because he was fetching water and asked, "Senior brother, what do you mean?" After thinking for a long time, sixth senior brother gave a silly smile and replied in a low voice, "Little junior brother, second senior brother has always been very straightforward, but he spoke to you so tactfully today. It seems that the situation is really not good." Senior brothers and sisters all left the lake and returned to their own dense forests under the pine trees and flowers. They began to play the zither and flute, play chess or play flowers in silence. No one laughed at Ning Ke and no one came to comfort him. Because in their eyes, Ning Ke's performance of the Haran sword by the lake was so absurd that they did not know what to say. Ning Ke stood silently by the lake for a while and finally got the answer that was closest to the truth from the attitude of senior brothers and sisters and the explanation of sixth brother. He could not help but feel bored. However, after a while, he could not help but laugh when he thought of second brother's previous hesitation. Then he continued to practice the sword movement of the Haran sword while laughing. He had thought that it was a very good performance, but in the eyes of senior brothers and sisters on the second floor of the academy, it was so bad that it was speechless. This kind of psychological gap might be a great blow to ordinary people, but for Ning Ke, especially now, it was nothing at all. Therefore, by the mirror lake at the back of the mountain of the academy, a wooden sword without a handle like an old woman with small feet flew up from time to time. It flew tremblingly, it flew in panic, it flew aimlessly, or it moved. Sometimes it fell to the ground, and sometimes it almost stabbed Ning Ke himself. Once it even flew directly into the lake and he had to get wet to catch it. Ning Ke kept practicing until the psyche power in his sense of perception was squeezed out. Then he stopped panting and sat on a rock by the lake. He held a handful of cool lake water and sprinkled it on his face, letting out a sigh of satisfaction. Chen Pippi, who had finished repairing the tactical array of the Cloud Gate today, came to the lake. He looked at Ning Ke's pale face and suddenly said after a moment of silence, "There are some things that can't be solved by risking one's life." Ning Ke looked up at the blue sky and white clouds and said with a smile, "In the past, you said that cultivation is a gift from Haotian and we can't force it. If we can't cultivate, we can't cultivate. But at least I can cultivate now." Chen Pippi shook his head and said, "But if you always try so hard, how can your body bear it?" "I don't try so hard. I just like it." Ning Ke glanced at him and picked up the hiltless sword beside him. He waved it casually in the air and said with a smile, "One day, I will make this sword become a flying sword. Recommendation votes and monthly votes. I shout with a hoarse voice. Now I realize that I really have to fight for these things. Just saying that I like them is not enough. Give them to me, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 177. The old brush pen shop had a front shop and a backyard, but the place was too small. It was too dangerous to use the old woman's flying sword here. It didn't matter if the flowers and plants were hurt, but did he want Sang Sang to wash the rice and cook with the big black umbrella? So Ning Ke didn't practice his swordsmanship after returning to Lin 47th Street. He stood in front of the desk again, dipped the brush in ink, and stared at the snow-white book paper. Today he didn't stare blankly like a statue. He took deep breaths from time to time, paced back and forth, raised his eyebrows, and even faintly heard him humming a tune. The brush in his right hand was not as heavy as it was a few days ago, but hung in the air easily and drew at a distance. Although he still didn't write, he seemed to be much more relaxed. Sang Sang cut the pumpkin into vertical strips and put them on the rice bowl to steam. She entered the inner room to untie her apron and saw this scene. She curiously watched Ning Kei circling the desk and drawing in the air with the brush in his hand. After a while, she felt a little dizzy and said while covering her forehead, "Young master, I'm really itchy. Let's try writing a few lines." Ning Kei stopped jumping and said with a smile, "You know it won't work. Why bother trying?" Sang Sang wiped her wet hands and said with a smile, "Even if it doesn't work, I can still sell some ink balls." Ning Kei laughed when he heard this. Sang Sang suddenly realized and looked at Ning Kei in surprise. She wondered what happened today. Young master didn't become an idiot when he picked up the brush and still had the energy to chat with her. Then Ning Kei ate with her. After dinner, he asked her to make a pot of tea and moved the armchair to the small courtyard. They sat and chatted while watching the stars, drinking tea, and chatting. He seemed to be extremely relaxed and happy. When the lights were turned on at night, he walked into the room, took off his coat and leaned against the bed. He took out a book from nowhere and read it attentively. His eyebrows were slightly raised from time to time and his fingers were rubbing slowly. Sang Sang walked into the room with water to wash his feet. She couldn't help feeling puzzled as she thought of the many strange things that happened tonight. After living together for so many years, she knew very well that Ning Kei would work hard like a few days ago when he was stuck in a difficult problem. She really couldn't understand why he suddenly became so relaxed today. Could it be that he was desperate to solve that problem? "Young master, what book are you reading?" She looked at the old book in Ning Kei's hand and asked. Ning Kei was stunned by her question. He glanced at the erotic book that he had secretly brought out from the cliff cave at the back of the mountain of the academy. He coughed twice to cover up his embarrassment and turned around to avoid her gaze. He said, "You're still too young to read those things between men and women." Sang Sang took off his shoes and socks, then moved a stool to sit on the other side of the basin. She patted his thigh and motioned him to put his feet in the basin. She said, "It's just some romantic stuff between scholars and beauties. What's there to see?" Ning Kei said with a smile, "You don't understand the beauty of this. Ouch. It's so comfortable. Don't scratch my feet." On the cliff plateau at the back of the academy, the fog had faded and the scenery was quiet and elegant. The water wheel behind the house was spinning and the dull sound of iron striking could be heard from time to time in the house. Then with a sizzling sound, the room was filled with water mist. In a dark corner, fourth brother was observing the direction of the talisman lines on the sand table by the glimmer of light from the window. When the steam came to his face, he slightly frowned and waved his hand to disperse it. But his eyes were still fixed on the sand table and he looked extremely focused. Those inexplicably complicated and inexplicable lines on the sand table moved slowly, following some indescribable law and extending toward each other. When they finally touched each other, the lines changed again and were about to combine into a new pattern. Fourth brother's eyes became brighter and brighter, but his face became paler and paler. Looking at his dignified expression, it could be seen that this talisman deduction had reached the most critical moment. However, at this moment, there was a panicked cry on the cliff plateau outside the house, followed by a faint sound of breaking wind. A gray shadow of a sword flew into the door crookedly. The sixth senior brother, who was concentrating on smithing, suddenly raised his thick eyebrows. His right hand picked up the heavy iron hammer as if he was holding a piece of paper and smashed it towards the sword shadow. This smash was indescribably heavy as if it was light and wonderful to the extreme. It was absolutely impossible to swing such a delicate and accurate hammer without dozens of years of smithing with the hammer day after day. However, because of the controller's panic and terrible ability, although the gray shadow of the sword was extremely slow, it flew crookedly and irregularly. Because of its irregular speed, it seemed a little elusive. Sometimes it raised its head up like the proud second brother, and sometimes it hovered in the air and swayed like the philosophical 11th brother. It really did not take the usual path. It randomly and coincidentally avoided the swing of sixth brother's iron hammer and flew to the dark corner with a swoosh. With a snap, the handleless flying sword hit deeply into the sand table in the corner. The sword body slightly trembled, and the tip of the sword accurately hit the intersection of the talisman lines. It could be seen that those lines suddenly broke inch by inch like a freed rope, no longer in the same situation as before. Holding the iron hammer, sixth brother glanced at the sand table in the corner and smiled honestly. Then he turned around and continued to forge iron. Fourth brother, who had been concentrating on the sand table and did not notice the flying sword at all, finally reacted at this time. Looking at the broken lines on the sand table, his face suddenly became extremely pale, and his body violently trembled because of anger. A figure appeared at the door, panting and smiling obsequiously. "Senior brothers, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Fourth brother suddenly turned around and stared at the clean and lovely face at the door, as if he had seen the dirtiest and most abominable thing in the world. His pale face suddenly turned red, and he heavily hit the sand table and roared, "Ning Ke. Can you find a place where there is no one? This is the third time. If there is a next time, I will tear you apart." As the saying goes, people make mistakes, horses make mistakes, and the headmaster of academy also has times when he is hungry. I just started to cultivate Haren's sword, so it is understandable that I made some mistakes. I really don't understand why fourth brother is so angry. Ning Ke walked along the lake with the wooden sword and muttered, "Fortunately, sixth brother didn't hit the sword with his hammer, or the sword would have been smashed, and I would have to ask second brother for it." His ability to control the flying sword was really terrible now. He had 10 acupoints in the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, but he could only control a little chi of heaven and earth. The transmission was not smooth, so his command of the grassroots troops was naturally very poor. It was basically wishful thinking for him to attack wherever he wanted, and it was common for him to point here and there. Bypassing the mirror lake, he came to a dense forest, across the lake from sixth brother's iron-making room. He thought that with his state of cultivation, even if he exploded his small universe, he could not fly the sword to the other side of the lake. His heart suddenly calmed down, and he adjusted his breath. After a moment of meditation, he urged his psyche power, and the wooden sword spread out in both hands flew into the air again and slowly circled around his head twice. Looking up at the flying sword dancing against the blue sky, Ning Ke felt extremely satisfied and murmured in admiration, "This feeling is really good. Although I can't use it to kill people, it is also good to use it to perform magic tricks." Just as he was thinking about this, the hiltless flying sword instantly broke away from the control of his psyche power. With a sudden sound, it rushed down from the sky, and the tip of the sword pointed directly at his face. He was so scared that he hugged his head and directly lay on the ground, extremely embarrassed. Before the flying sword was about to land, it was not known whether it had received the response of his psyche power or some other reason, but it strangely shook itself forcibly and flew up again. With a swoosh, it brushed his scalp and flew diagonally into the dense forest. Lying on the ground, Ning Ke stretched out his fingers to pinch a sword formula, and found that the flying sword had broken away from the perception of his sense of perception. He climbed up while cursing, "This disobedient little thing." At this moment, there was a rustling sound in the dense forest. Ninth brother Beigong Weiyang came out with one hand covering his forehead, and the other hand holding the flute and the flying sword. He looked very miserable. Ninth brother walked up to Ning Ke and looked at him expressionlessly. Then he pointed to his forehead, picked up the flute and gently tapped the wooden sword twice, and said with a dignified expression, "Youngest brother, you don't have this talent, so don't force yourself. If you continue to practice like this, it doesn't matter if you hurt us senior brothers and sisters, but if you scare away the birds in the forest, do you want to listen to our flute and zither music?" Ning Ke held back his laughter and stepped forward to take the wooden sword. Suddenly he thought of something and said with a smile, "Ninth brother, if there are no birds in the forest to listen to the wonderful music, then why don't you play a song for me? In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, seventh sister was embroidering while humming a soft and pleasant southern song. Suddenly, she slightly raised her eyebrows and turned her wrist. The thin embroidery needle pinched between her fingers made a horrible air-breaking sound, and very accurately flicked away the wooden sword that flew out of nowhere near her right cheek. With a clap, the wooden sword fell into the lake and sank to the bottom. Ning Ke ran to the lakeside, panting, and waved to her in the pavilion. He said, "Seventh sister, can you help youngest brother to call the flying sword up? I have fished in the lake 3 times today, and I really have no clothes to change into." Seventh sister slightly frowned, looked at him and said, "I don't want to talk to you. The dignified Haran sword has been practiced by you into a wasp's tail needle, which is so sinister and powerful. If it weren't for the people in the back mountain who have the ability to protect themselves, I'm afraid that they would really fall into your trap." Ning Ke sadly said, "Seventh sister, this is not what I want. What can I do if it doesn't listen to me? I can't beat it." His words were really a little cute. Seventh sister covered her sleeves and smiled. Suddenly, her eyes rolled and her fingers slightly flicked. With a slight sound, Ning Ke suddenly felt something extra on his collar. Although you are just in the no-doubt state, you should have some ideas about natal items, right? Sixth brother asked. Ning Ke said in distress, "It's funny. Now I have a strong reaction to silver, but I can't take silver ingots as natal items." Sixth brother was stunned. After a long silence, he said, "Then I give you some silver needles." Ning Ke's eyes lit up and said, "Can you make it heavier?" Sixth brother looked at him and said, "It will be gold if it's heavier." Ning Ke said seriously, "Although I haven't tried gold, I believe that my feeling towards it will definitely surpass my feeling towards silver." Sixth brother was silent again. After a long time, he said helplessly, "Gold needles are too soft. I will find a way to mix something else for you." Ning Ke was overjoyed and bowed deeply. Then he suddenly thought of a possibility and his eyes became brighter. On the second day of a certain day, in a calligraphy and painting shop on Lin 47th Street in Chang'an City, a black-faced handmaiden threw pots and rags with a sullen face. She was in an extremely bad mood and decided to take out her private money to buy cosmetic powder in Chenjinji Cosmetics store. And her young master, like a bad gambler, grabbed a pile of silver notes and went out. He exchanged them for silver and gold and returned to the back of the mountain of the academy happily. The coarse wrapping cloth was untied, and 3 padeos, which had been polished until they shone with a cold light, appeared in front of the 6th senior brother. Ning Ke stood beside the 3 padeos and looked at 6th brother with hope in his eyes. 6th brother looked at the padeos and the gold and silver beside them. After a long silence, he looked up at the excited Ning Ke and asked seriously, "According to these things, I think youngest brother, you are going to play with flying knives?" "Yes." Ning Ke rubbed his hands and said nervously, "Senior brother, I'm good at bladesmanship. Since swords can fly, so can knives. And with your help, I believe it will be better than flying swords." Sixth brother's expression finally became stiff. "But, have you ever seen such a big flying knife in the world?" In Ning Ke's view, the enemy hated him, so their verbal attacks were nothing. Those smart people were best at talking, so their verbal attacks were also nothing. However, sixth brother was a simple and honest good man. His occasional verbal attacks had deeply hurt his self-esteem. Because he was a little depressed and hurt his self-esteem, Ning Ke decided to calm down and think about what to do in the future. So he went to the mountain road and went straight to the flowering trees. In the deep spring, he found 11th brother who was muttering to himself. "Senior brother, do you have any new ideas recently? Tell me about them." Someone was flying a sword by the lake, smashing the flowers, grass and senior brothers' heads, messing up the senior sister's embroidery, messing up the magical lines on the sand table, and messing up the green waves and wet grass in the water. A certain someone was flying needles in the forest, and a few wounds appeared on his body. Not long after, he could be seen being chased by a fat white goose, crying out in pain all over the mountains and plains. Someone was forging iron in the house with all kinds of strange materials at his feet, mainly gold and silver, supplemented by gems. Sixth brother was silently sorting out the design for him, and his simple and honest face was full of grievances. In the late spring of the 14th year of Tianqi era, these scenes kept repeating in the back mountain of the academy. Until many years later, people living in the back mountain still felt a little scared when they thought of those days. That junior brother who had just entered the second floor was practicing his lousy sword and his lousy needles, thinking of his lousy ideas, torturing his senior brothers and sisters, causing them to feel incomparably vexed. Have you been crazy lately? Chen Pipi put down the food box and looked at Ning Kai, who was still satisfied after losing 3 games of chess to eighth brother, and asked with emotion. What do you mean? Trying flying needles or flying knives? Ning Kai asked confusedly. Everything. Chen Pipi said angrily, you haven't even mastered the Haran sword, and you haven't mastered the talisman Taoism from Master Yen Sei. How can you have so much energy to do so many strange things? It's always good to learn more. Why are you so anxious? Cultivation is about gradual progress, and the most important thing is to lay a good foundation. My aptitude is so poor that it's useless to lay a good foundation. It's better to learn more. Chen Pipi sighed and said, in my opinion, you'd better focus on talisman Taoism. Talisman Taoism is about comprehension and talent, not the foundation. Ning Kai asked curiously, why can't we learn together? Chen Pipi frowned and said, greed is not a good thing for cultivation. Ning Kai said with a smile, I have learned the truth since I was a child. Nothing can be achieved without greed. Chen Pipi was so angry that he laughed and said, I just found out that you are such a stupid person, even more stupid than second brother. I won't tell second brother this. A bowl of crab porridge. That's impossible. Our family has been losing money too fast recently, and Sang Sang is already very unhappy. Then, how much do you want? 200 taels of silver. 200 taels of silver. Why do you need so many silver needles? Do you want to learn medicine and acupuncture? It's none of your business. Fine, fine, fine. Then I'll scold you more for being an idiot. Pipi, don't forget that the back of the mountain is the second floor of the academy. We are all on the second floor, so we are all idiots. Idiot Chen, do you have a problem with that? I have no problem with that. Chen Pipi looked at him as if he was looking at a madman, and gritted his teeth and said, even if you do that for cultivation, why do you harass senior brothers every day? In the beginning, didn't you turn pale when you heard that you were going to listen to music and play chess? Why did you suddenly change your temper and go to listen to music and play chess every day? Ning Kai answered with a smile, I didn't like it at first because I didn't like to be forced to listen to music and play chess. Now that second brother has said that no one will force me, I can still do it if I want to. Senior brother Baigong's flute is really good. Where can I find a chance to play chess with the 2 national masters outside the academy? Doing some extracurricular activities as entertainment during cultivation can cultivate one's character. In the future, when I travel around the world, these things can be used to brag and shock people. Chen Pipi was dumbfounded. He held his chubby cheeks and asked, what about 11th brother? Why are you bothering him? 11th brother doesn't think I'm bothering him. Ning Kai approached him and said in a low voice, have you found that listening to 11th brother's mysterious questions can not only help you fall asleep, but also help you meditate? That night, all the disciples of the second floor of the academy held a group meeting at the back of the mountain. Even the scholar in the small library in the cliff cave was called over. However, the old man was reading an old book and did not pay attention to what the people around him were saying. Ning Ke did not attend the meeting, not because he had returned home in Chang'an, but because the main topic of the meeting was to discuss how to deal with his current problem. Don't you think youngest brother is miserable? Haran's sword has become a wasp-tail needle. This is definitely not his wish, but his aptitude is like this, so he is forced to think of these messy ideas. I say you should be more tolerant. Although he smiles every day, I always feel that there are tears in his smile, and there is a shadow in his heart. The meeting was held in the courtyard where second brother lived. Seventh sister held an embroidery frame and sat cross-legged in the deepest part of the Arhat bed. Her posture was very casual and natural, and it could be seen that she was not afraid of second brother. Hearing this, fourth brother, who had the most serious expression, frowned and said, "It's not a matter of tolerance. Will I really be angry with youngest brother? Now the main problem is how to help youngest brother solve his cultivation problems." Third sister, Yu Lian, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, smiled slightly, but did not say anything. Chapter 178. It was quiet in the small courtyard. After a long time, seventh sister suddenly sneered. However, she did not speak after laughing. Instead, she picked out the pine nuts from her handkerchief, peeled them, and blew the crumbs. After carefully sorting them, she handed them to third sister. Second brother slightly frowned and looked at her, asking, "Youngest sister, what are you laughing at?" Seventh sister threw the pine nuts into her mouth and slowly chewed for a moment. She casually clapped her hands and slightly raised her eyebrows. She fearlessly looked into his eyes and said, "Second brother really won't lie. Who lied to Prince Long Qing at the top of the cliff that night?" After a moment of silence, second brother slowly replied, "Is lying, and lying the same thing?" "Forget it," I said. Chen Pippi looked at seventh sister and said angrily, "Everyone knows second brother's temperament. He said he won't lie, so he won't lie." That night, I asked him for help to slow down Long Qing. What he said was not false. You didn't see how nervous second brother was at that time. His facial expression was quite calm, but the hard stones under the tree were all crushed into powder by him. Count on second brother to increase Ning Ke's confidence. That sneaky guy can see through it at a glance. Fourth brother said, "The so-called confidence is still a little too mysterious. He can't practice Haran sword, so we should start from specific means. The movement curve of flying sword is very easy to calculate. Although the relationship between air resistance and flying sword speed is a little complicated, it is not impossible to calculate. Ning Ke is excellent in math, so it should be easier for him to understand. No matter how you calculate, teach, or do, there is no way to solve youngest brother's most fundamental problem. That is, his ocean of qi and mountain of snow has only opened 10 acupoints, and the qi of heaven and earth that he can control is too weak. If this problem can't be solved, even if teacher and eldest brother go home and use magic means to help youngest brother enter knowing destiny state, it will be meaningless, because he will be the weakest knowing destiny state in the world. After a moment of silence, second brother looked at fourth brother and said, "You and sixth brother first help him with those strange things. If he can't do it himself, he should pay more attention to the help of external help." Ninth brother suddenly shook his head and said, "I think it is better to let youngest brother learn to play the flute and the zither from me and Shiman brothers, so that he can make a living after leaving the academy." 11th brother smiled and said calmly, "Recently, youngest brother has often asked me about the knowledge of things. I think it is better to let him learn from me, which is helpful to his state of mind." Seventh sister grabbed a handful of melon seeds from the windowsill and lowered her head to pick the plumpest melon kernels. She said with slight mockery, "11th brother, if I learn these useless things from you, what if youngest brother starves to death in the future?" 11th brother looked at her and explained seriously, little senior sister, my family is very rich in the south. In the future, I will inherit a large amount of family property. Even if little junior brother is a waste, I can support him for a lifetime. At this point in time, the topic of the meeting to help Ning Kei's youngest brother had gradually deviated to an unknown direction. Everyone in the room was talking at once, giving advice, discussing enthusiastically and debating fiercely. They were deeply concerned about Ning Kei's future livelihood and expressed that they could be responsible for Ning Kei's life. Even they were touched by their friendship as fellow disciples. Senior brothers and senior sisters, don't you think too much? Chen Pipi looked at the people in the room who were eating melon seeds, drinking tea and having a tea party. He rubbed the back of his head and said bitterly, I know better than you what kind of person Ning Kei is. Although he is an idiot in cultivation, he is not a real idiot. Don't tell me you haven't done anything. Ever since he entered the back mountain, all of us have been circling around him. Someone like him doesn't need us to worry about him. I dare say that even if all the people in the world died, including us in the room, he would not die, let alone starve to death. Hearing this, the people on the second floor of the academy were stunned. Thinking of the experience these days, their expressions became very interesting. Beigong Weiyang gently stroked his flute and said with a frown, that's true. When younger brother wants to listen to music, he goes into the woods and plays for us. When he doesn't want to listen, he resolutely refuses to listen. Why do I feel that I have become a singer in front of him? Fifth brother patted his thigh and shook his head, saying with emotion, he said he would play chess. Obviously, eighth brother and I just entered the middle game, but he dared to interfere and forced us to hold back our temper to guide him. Otherwise, he would really dare to throw away the chess pieces. In front of younger brother, we are just two village chess teachers who are not up to standard. Sixth brother looked at the thoughtful people and said with a simple and honest smile, Ning Kei treats me well. Although he often has some inexplicable ideas, he often helps me to forge iron and carry water, which saves me a lot of trouble. Second brother looked at the younger brothers who were complaining about their bloody and tearful history and slightly raised his eyebrows, saying, Ning Kei is the youngest younger brother. As his senior brothers, it is natural for you to take care of him. What's there to say about these things? Listening to second brother's admonition and looking at his serious expression, everyone in the room was shocked at the same time. They all bowed their heads and agreed. Even seventh sister, who had been very casual before, also put the melon seeds back on the windowsill. Although I despise Yen Sei's attitude of playing with the world, I have to admit that as the Minister of Offerings of the South School of Haotian, he is indeed the world's top class and even the most powerful divine talisman master. He is more powerful than people think. Second brother slightly lowered his eyes and looked at something in front of him. After a moment of silence, he continued to say in a low voice, since younger brother is so talented and only suitable for the way of talisman Taoism, let him learn more from Yen Sei in the future. It was quiet in the room. Seventh sister raised her head and slightly frowned, saying, but younger brother is after all a member of the second floor of the academy. Now he can be regarded as the teacher's last disciple. But his cultivation is all taught by an outsider. How can it be spread out? Even if we are not afraid of the gossip of the world, will the teacher and eldest brother be disappointed with us when they come back? It was unknown whether the headmaster of the academy would be deeply disappointed when he returned to the academy with his eldest disciple after traveling and found that he had inexplicably gained a last disciple who was only in the no-doubt state and had an extremely poor cultivation aptitude. Moreover, the only ability this disciple could show was the means of talisman Taoism learned from Haotian Taoism. Anyway, Ning Kei was not disappointed. Although the Haoren sword was still like the snow covering the dog shit, he had adjusted his mentality very well. Besides studying in the back of the mountain of the academy these days, he would travel around Chang and with Master Yen Sei every few days. He approached the Tao of talisman Taoism in a relaxed and interesting way and lived a very fulfilling life. In those days at the end of spring and the beginning of summer in the 14th year of Tianqi era, the residents of Chang and could often see an extremely dirty old Taoist wandering around with a simple but extremely clean lad. The old Taoist took the lad through the streets and alleys to see the old and dilapidated buildings that had been inherited for hundreds of years. They went to various taverns to drink and occasionally spent the night in the cheapest brothel. Most of the time, they went to see the scenery that tourists must go to. When walking through the newly renovated block of Spring Breeze Pavilion, Yen Sei was full of emotion and said, "Although it is new, the original meaning has been lost. Fortunately, there is still this pavilion. Don't you think the curve of the pavilion's eaves is beautiful?" Ning Ke walked in the streets where he once fought for a night and looked at the old Spring Breeze Pavilion at the corner of the street absent-mindedly. He woke up after hearing his master's words and carefully looked at the 4 slightly protruding lines above the pavilion's eaves. After a long time, he doubtfully asked, "I can't tell what's beautiful about it. I just think it looks very harmonious. The place where the black tiles meet is slightly sunken and then raised, very smooth. That is the rain line." Master Yen Sei pointed at the eaves line and said, "The rain falls on the black tiles and flows down along the overlapping place of the tiles. It doesn't pass through the rain line, but the shape of the rain line implies the falling rain is slippery, so you will feel it is smooth." "Master, what does the rain line on the pavilion's eaves mean?" Ning Ke asked. "This pavilion should have been built many years ago. Those craftsmen can't be talisman masters. Can they also understand the law of the Qi of heaven and earth?" "What is the law?" "The law is a fixed rule of the operation of things. Those craftsmen who built Spring Breeze Pavilion may not have mastered the law of the operation of the Qi of heaven and earth, but the knowledge of building eaves has been passed down for countless generations, so there is indeed some hidden wisdom in it." Master Yen Sei took him to the pavilion and said, "How does the rain walk? Why does it walk like this?" The craftsmen who built the pavilion don't know. Maybe their grandmaster only knows the answer to the first question, but not the second question. But it doesn't matter. The first step for human beings to learn from the heaven and earth is always imitation. If you imitate more, you will naturally practice the simplest truth, which is the undulating shape of the line, just like this eaves. Walking to the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Master Yen Sei turned around and looked at Ning Ke, saying, "The first step to practice talisman Taoism is imitation. I let you read the talisman classics left by the predecessors and carefully feel the subtle difference between the Qi of heaven and earth, which is very similar to the building experience accumulated by the craftsmen for many years. However, they do it subconsciously and it takes several generations of time. But you have to take the initiative to grasp and feel it, and the less time, the better." After seeing Spring Breeze Pavilion, the master and the apprentice left the street and walked along the grey wall beside the courtyard to the distance. Stepping on the slightly protruding bluestone path and looking at the gurgling water not far from his feet, Ning Ke naturally remembered that rainy night. This ditch had been stained with blood, and these bluestone paths were full of mutilated corpses. Behind the grey wall was Chao Xiaoshu's mansion. Ning Ke looked up and saw the green trees in the courtyard. Occasionally, he could hear people's voices. He wondered if Chao Xiaoshu's family still lived here, and where had he gone. Seeming to guess what he was thinking, Master Yen Sei, who was walking in front with his sleeves behind his back, asked with a smile. Chao Xiaoshu entered the knowing destiny state by looking at the calm lake. This kind of understanding and lucky chance is really rare. Even with Chao Xiaoshu's talent, if he had not been forced by His Majesty to stay in the dark mud of Chang and for many years, I think it would be impossible for him to burst out such a brilliant brilliance. This was the first time for Ning Ke to know that Chao Xiaoshu was a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. Thinking of the bloody scene behind the middle-aged man on that rainy night, he could not help but raise his eyebrows slowly, and there was an indescribable sense of pride and grandeur in his heart. "You should have seen Chao Xiaoshu's swordsmanship." "Yes, master. What do you think is special? Very fast, like lightning. Ning Ke thought of the crooked wooden sword flying by the lake in the back mountain of the academy and felt very ashamed. Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "Is there anything else?" Ning Ke thought of one thing, but he licked his lips and did not say it. Because although Yen Sei was his master in talisman Taoism, that thing was very likely to be Chao Xiaoshu's trump card to save his life. This kind of thing should not be said to anyone. I didn't know that you are a person who values friendship and righteousness. Master Yen Sei looked at him with some surprise. Ning Ke smiled and replied, "Brother Chao treated me well. After I left Chang'an, he was still concerned about my livelihood and left me a large sum of silver every month. Even if he didn't care much for me, the silver would still weigh a lot." Yen Sei laughed and said, "Chao Xiaoshu divided one sword into 5. I know this thing without you telling me. I just want to tell you that when the 5 pieces of sword shrouded the streets around him like shooting stars, have you ever thought that if it was his natal sword, why could it still be so obedient to him after it was divided into 5 pieces? Ning Ke really didn't think about this problem. After the bloody battle last spring, he didn't think about it because he didn't know what cultivation was at that time. The reason why he didn't think about it later was that he didn't think about it at all. At this time, when he was walking away from Spring Breeze Pavilion to the street, he suddenly heard his master's question and suddenly fell into meditation. Master Yen Sei was not a teacher who liked to embarrass his students with all kinds of questions so as to gain a great sense of scholarly superiority, vanity, and sadistic pleasure. Glancing at Ning Ke who was frowning and thinking hard, Master Yen Sei directly explained, "Chao Xiaoshu's natal sword is divided into 5 small swords. The interaction between these 5 small swords depends on a kind of tactical array. And I have told you before that all tactical arrays can actually be regarded as a kind of transforming talisman, a big talisman that relies more on materials." Then he continued, "Taoism's sword skills are talismans, Buddhism's emblematic gestures are also talismans, and these 2 kinds of talismans are infinitive. As for the decorations on the general's 100 battles armor, although most of them are fragments, they are also talismans, but this kind of talisman is infinitive." Ning Ke glanced at him and couldn't help but say with a wry smile, "Master, I know you are the most powerful divine talisman master in the world, and I know every talisman master should have the deepest and most sincere feelings and love for talisman Taoism, but, if what you said is true, does it mean that all the cultivation methods in the world can finally be attributed to talismans? This kind of statement is really, too much, isn't it?" Master Yen Sei stopped and turned back to ask confusedly, "Too much? Too much?" After hesitating for a moment, Ning Ke lowered his voice and said, "Too narcissistic." Master Yen Sei laughed out loud, which attracted the attention of passers-by in the street. His laughter gradually stopped, and he looked at Ning Ke for a moment and seriously said, "The most important thing in cultivation is to have the mind, to dare to think and to dare to admit. The long road is long. If you don't believe that you can go to the end, how can you cross those difficult and strange dangerous peaks on the road of cultivation? The more excellent a cultivator is, the more confident he will be, and the most excellent cultivators must be extremely arrogant, which is probably what you call narcissism." Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth and couldn't say a word for a long time. He wanted to criticize what his master said was a fallacy, but after careful consideration, he felt that these words were very reasonable, especially when he thought of the 2 extremely narcissistic and proud guys, second brother of the academy and Chen Pipi. After leaving Spring Breeze Pavilion, they came to an open avenue from the eastern city through Shanmo Square. Not far away, the Yulin Royal Guards were patrolling on horses. There were fewer pedestrians on the street, and the environment was quiet and secluded along the banks of green trees and clear rivers. The towering imperial city not far away was clearly visible to the naked eye, and even some traces on the vermilion wall washed by the wind and rain could be seen. Master Yen Sei was not affected by the solemn atmosphere here at all. He still carried his sleeves and wore his old shoes, strolling slowly on the street, and didn't care about the vigilant and disgusted eyes of those Yulin royal guards. Ning Ke tried to hold back his laughter and followed him. Suddenly he remembered the part about carving talismans on armors in the previous conversation, and some introductions by Liu Qingchen on the journey last year. His eyes suddenly brightened, and he hurried to Master Yen Sei and said in a very respectful and gentle tone, "Master, I want to ask you for a talisman." Yen Sei turned back and asked, "Ask for a talisman? What happened to your family? Did you see something unclean, and was pressed on the bed?" Ning Ke opened his mouth and didn't know how to answer, feeling very powerless. Master Yen Sei squinted his triangular eyes wretchedly and said, "Just kidding." Ning Ke sighed and said seriously, "I want to carve a talisman on my knife." After thinking for a moment, Master Yen Sei shook his head and said, "Some talismans can indeed be used without a talisman master, such as sending messages, armors, and weapons. This kind of carving talismans is not rare, but after all, it is not pure enough, and its power is not too great. As the saying goes, your own talisman is the best. If it is your personal weapon, you'd better keep it in the future." Ning Ke said with a bitter smile, "Then I don't know when I can get what I want." Master Yen Sei patted him on the shoulder and comforted him, "I firmly believe in your talent in talisman Taoism. Now you just haven't seen through the window paper yet. Slowly feel it, and you will find that there is always hope in front of you. Look over there carefully." "What's over there?" "Look by yourself." "Master, I only see a lot of trees." "What about behind the trees?" "Behind the trees is the sky. What I want you to see is not these things." "Master, you don't want me to say that I see hope, do you? I really can't say such sour words." "Master, why don't you speak? In fact, in my opinion, it is really not suitable for you to play the role of a spiritual mentor, since you have such a temperament of seeing beauties as white bones in the world." Ning Quebec, "Yes, Master. If you go on, I will use the grass talisman to make you unable to see things for the rest of your life." There was no hope in front of the master and disciple. They could only see a Taoist temple in the green forest at the foot of the imperial city. Master Yen Sei did not take Ning Ke into the southern gate temple, because they were private master and disciple. After all, Ning Ke was a student of the academy, and it was very inappropriate for him to be too close to Haotian Taoism. "What I want you to see is the cornice of the sightseeing hall of the southern gate." Because of the previous conversation, Master Yen Sei's face was very ugly, and his tone was very stiff. Ning Ke looked up and saw the cornice of the main hall of the Taoist temple in the blue sky behind the grey walls and green trees. "Master, why do you want to see this cornice? Do you want to understand the law that the craftsmen of the past subconsciously summed up from the power of rain?" It is enough to see the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Do you want to see it forever? We have seen a lot of old temples, old pavilions, small bridges, flowing water, and houses in Chang'an City these days. If we continue to see it, I am afraid that the Chang'an local government will suspect that we are two thieves. Grass talisman, Master, I was wrong. Master Yen Sei suppressed his anger after a while, pointed to the cornice deep in the Taoist temple, and said with a livid face, "This time I don't want you to see the cornice, but the animals on the eaves squatting on the cornice. You release your psyche power to feel it and see what is there." Ning Ke suddenly became serious. After a moment of silence, he slowly released his psyche power and touched the stone beasts on eaves that were half squatting on the eaves. The existence of the beasts on eaves was fed back into the sense of perception woven by psyche power through the chi of heaven and earth. However, the next moment, the beasts on eaves seemed to be alive, and he could even see their eyes. His heartbeat began to accelerate gradually, and his breathing became heavier and heavier. Those animals on the eaves in the sense of perception and sight became more and more clear, and the coercion from them became heavier and heavier, which directly made his face pale and his body extremely stiff. Master Yen Sei stood beside him and didn't worry about his reaction. Instead, he was calm and slightly happy. Ning Kei was so sensitive to the reaction of the animals on the eaves, which slightly diluted his anger after being ridiculed before. Ning Kei shook his head and got rid of the previous state. He raised his hands to rub his eyes, looked at Master Yen Sei and said, "Master, I feel it, and I understand." Master Yen Sei slightly frowned, and it seemed that he didn't expect that Ning Kei could actually get rid of the coercion from the animals on the eaves. Ning Kei glanced at the animals on the eaves in the distance, which became smaller again, and said, "Master, do you want to tell me that these stone animals on the eaves are also talismans, which are endowed by the divine talisman master with power and coercion that is close to a powerful life?" Master Yen Sei said, "Yes. What I am more confused about is why you didn't panic when you touched the animals on the eaves for the first time." Ning Kei looked at him, and after a moment of silence, he honestly replied, "I have touched the animals on the eaves before." Master Yen Sei slightly raised his white eyebrows and asked, "When? Where?" Ning Kei said, "Last spring, in the palace. When the carriage passed by the laundry office, I don't know why, when I saw the animals on the eaves of the palace, I suddenly felt that they were alive, and I felt very uncomfortable at that time." Master Yen Sei was silent for a long time, and suddenly reached out to touch his head, and his eyes were full of gentle appreciation. Listening to your words and seeing your actions, I always feel that your temperament and state of mind are really not suitable for cultivating talisman Taoism. I even wonder if I was misled by your note and saw something wrong. As a superclass divine talisman master in the world, the old Taoist was very clear that a young man who had never touched cultivation could innately feel the coercion from the animals on the eaves, which represented what kind of talent he had in talisman Taoism. I am very pleased that you once again proved your aptitude and ability. Ning Kei said with a smile, "Master, aptitude and ability are in the body, and don't need to prove it. In fact, they have always existed. Today you said a lot of nonsense, but this sentence is reasonable." Master Yen Sei laughed, and then continued to ask with concern, "Last time in the Imperial Laundry Office, was it the first time that you felt the coercion from the animals on the eaves?" Ning Kei fell into a long silence because of this question. He remembered that on that day last spring, he and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and stood on the straight and spacious street in the drizzle, and then they were suppressed into two statues by the vermilion bird painting in the middle of the street. After a long time, he raised his head and looked at Master Yen Sei, saying, "Actually, earlier, on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, the stone vermilion bird painting also gave me the same feeling, but I don't know what the vermilion bird painting is." Hearing his answer, Master Yen Sei squinted his eyes into two slits, and suddenly said, "Do you want to see the vermilion bird again?" Of course, Ning Kei didn't want to see it. It had nothing to do with the vermilion bird carved in the stone, which had no charm, but he was extremely afraid of the vermilion bird painting on the stone path subconsciously. Maybe he was too scared by the ancient killing intent of the vermilion bird in the middle of the street on that rainy day last spring, or maybe he still subconsciously remembered the near-death experience when he fled to the street on that sultry summer night last year. Anyway, the shadow in his heart was so thick that it could not be any more. However, as an excellent student, he was very clear that every time a teacher asked a student whether he wanted to do something, he just needed to show an attitude of respecting the student's will. In fact, the teacher would never want to hear any answer except yes. So when Master Yen Sei asked, he honestly answered that he wanted to go. From the foot of the imperial city, the two walked along the spacious and straight Vermilion Bird Avenue all the way to the south, as if they were stepping on a gray-brown ribbon embroidered with green lace, from the head of the giant in Chang'an City to the chest. Looking at the vermilion bird painting on the stone slab in the middle of the avenue, Ning Kei felt that his mouth was a little dry. He subconsciously put his hands into the cuffs, clenched them very tightly, and felt that his body was a little stiff. The vermilion bird painting was as solemn and beautiful as usual. Its wings had not fully spread out, and it was just the time when it was about to flap. The two eyes that were not angry but majestic were so well carved that no matter from which angle you looked, you would feel that it was staring at you. This was a must-see scenic spot for people from all counties of the Tang Empire when they came to Chang'an City, and the two eyes of the vermilion bird painting were also the wonderful thing that all the tourists talked about. Standing in the crowd with different clothes and looking at the vermilion bird painting in the middle, Ning Kei's vigilance and fear in his heart faded a little, perhaps because of the noisy environment and the lively people around him. However, his body was still stiff, and his hands and feet were still cold, because he always felt that the eyes that had been staring at him had nothing to do with the skills of the carvers. The eyes seemed to be telling him that the vermilion bird, which had experienced thousands of years of wind and rain, was alive. I have two pieces of news to report to you. First, because I went crazy again and ate too much, I still have a chapter of 3,000 words later, so I will continue to write it. Second, my friend Sharp Knife has started a new book called Transformation of God of War. You can click on the direct train below and directly go there. Please support me. The advertising slogan is as follows: this is a huge, beautiful, and mysterious world of Do Chi, where countless powerhouses are hidden. On the road of martial arts, you fight with the sky, the earth, and people. Never surrender, never retreat. If the road in front of you is blocked, then use your fists to punch a way out. As long as you have the heart of a powerhouse, no matter what is in front of you, you will directly smash it with one punch. Transformation of God of War, Blood Boiling. Chapter 179. Seeing the vermilion bird again, do you have any new feelings? No, right? Don't you think it's alive? Master, do you also think so? At this time, the master and the disciple had walked out of the crowd and continued to the south along the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Hearing Master Yen Sei's words, Ning Kei asked in surprise, and then he could not help but look back at the vermilion bird painting that was surrounded by the crowd and could no longer be seen. Master Yen Sei ignored him and continued to walk forward. What kind of existence can be sure to be alive and has life? Ning Kei turned to catch up with him, thinking that when 11th brother asked this kind of question, he was sleeping most of the time. Of course, this is a difficult question, and it has little to do with the reason why I take you to see the vermilion bird painting today. Master Yen Sei said, I take you here to tell you that the painting on the Vermilion Bird Avenue has nothing to do with artistic sculpture. It is a divine talisman in Chang'an. Ning Kei was slightly startled. He really did not associate the vermilion bird painting with talisman Taoism, because he could faintly feel that the vermilion bird painting possessed a kind of terrifying power. The killing intent that seemed to come from ancient times and the existence of talisman, which felt wonderful but faint, seemed to be from two different worlds. You have said before that we talisman masters regard all the cultivation methods in the world as talismans. It is a very narcissistic mentality. But I can tell you with certainty that the vermilion bird painting is a talisman, a divine talisman left by the previous sage. The words of sage and divine talisman came into Ning Kei's mind. He frowned tightly and asked after a long silence, Master, you once said that divine talisman masters can move the world with talismans only after they have crossed that step. Has the previous sage who left the vermilion bird painting already crossed that step? 1,000 years ago, the empire set the capital of Chang'an and expanded on the basis of the original city. At that time, the vermilion bird divine talisman had already existed. When the previous sage drew the vermilion bird divine talisman, he must have surpassed the knowing destiny state, but I don't know whether it was Tianqi or limitless state. But the talisman that I told you last time, I guess, it needs a more profound state. Does it mean that he has become an immortal? Is there such a great cultivator in the world? When Haotian Taoism is cultivated to the end, beyond Tianqi is immortalization. The so-called immortalization is immortal ascension. Although I have never seen it with my own eyes, there are many seniors who have immortalization and immortal ascension in the Taoist classics. A legend is just a legend. Master Yen Sei raised his eyebrows and said, "Do you think an ordinary mortal will think I am an immortal when he sees a divine talisman master like me?" Ning Ke said uncertainly. "Maybe. That's why it's not so hard to imagine that one can ascend to become an immortal in the end. But my guess is that these immortals are different from the immortals in myths and legends. They should be great cultivators who have truly transcended. Master, I'm more curious about the stories of the mortal world. The vermilion bird divine talisman left by the previous sage must be especially powerful. The problem is that the talisman Tao is self-contained. Who can activate this divine talisman?" Master Yen Sei said leisurely, "Since the founding of the Tang Empire, this vermilion bird divine talisman has been lying quietly on the stone road and has never been activated. But according to the judgment of someone in the academy and the former national master, once the vermilion bird divine talisman is activated, it can be equivalent to a full blow from a grand cultivator at the peak of knowing destiny state, and even surpass it in some aspects." "Only at the peak of knowing destiny state. Only? What's with your attitude?" "Master, you are at the peak of knowing destiny state, so is Lu Bai. I guess the national master and eldest brother are also at the peak of knowing destiny state. I don't even dare to guess the headmaster of academy. Now I know many grand cultivators at the knowing destiny state, such as second brother, Chao Xiao Shu, and even my silly friend are geniuses who have entered the knowing destiny state. Is the knowing destiny state really rare?" "Ning Quebec, Master, I'm here." Master Yen Sei looked at him and shook his head, saying, "You are very lucky, or you are very unlucky." Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Master, what do you mean?" "The place with the most grand cultivators in the world is the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy. You are a student of the second floor of the Academy and an apprentice of me, the great divine priest of the Divine Hall, so you can meet many powerhouses at the knowing destiny state. Ordinary cultivators may not meet powerhouses at the knowing destiny state in their lifetime, so I say you are very lucky. However, you are so weak now, but you have met so many powerhouses. I am worried that you will lose the courage to climb up and surpass the mountain." "Don't worry, Master. In fact, I am also a narcissist." "That's good." Unconsciously, Master Yen Sei and Ning Ke passed through the entire southern city along the Vermilion Bird Avenue and came to the southern gate of Chang'an City. The towering and majestic city wall seemed to break the sky, casting a shadow and covering a large area of the nearby marketplace. Master Yen Sei walked up the city wall with Ning Quebec. Nobody knew why the well-disciplined guards at the gate came to stop them or check their identities, as if they did not see them at all. Ning Ke was surprised and wondered why his master took him up the city wall, but he was too lazy to get to the bottom of it. He just stared at the dirty Taoist robe and climbed up. However, he was still a little confused about the power of the vermilion bird talisman, so he could not help but ask, "Master, how powerful is the knowing destiny state?" "I have asked someone to perform once, but I have never seen a fight at the knowing destiny state." Master Yen Sei frowned and asked, "Which silly grand cultivator would be so idiotic to perform for you?" Ning Ke secretly thought that the grand cultivator was named Chen Pipi. Although he was an idiot in life, he was really a good person. Master Yen Sei unhappily scolded, "As for the fight at the knowing destiny state, do you want me to find Lu Bai and have a fight with him again?" Ning Ke explained with a bitter face, "You misunderstood me. I am just curious." The master and the disciple climbed up the high city wall. The wind from the plain climbed up along the old but still strong city wall, with a few sharp cries of eagles, and their clothes were fluttering. Master Yen Sei stood on the edge of the city wall, stroking the black bricks and looking at the clearly visible mountain in the south. He suddenly said, your second brother in the academy only needs to look at you, and you will die. This is the knowing destiny state. Ning Ke stood beside him and thought silently, looking at the mountain where he had lived and studied for more than a month. Look at you, and you will die. Ning Ke carefully pondered these words and felt more and more respectful and timid. After a moment of silence, he honestly replied. Master, I understand. I will definitely be more respectful to you and second brother in the future. Master Yen Sei took him to the other side of the city wall facing Chang'an. Chang'an, which was composed of countless market buildings, had now become a jigsaw puzzle under their feet. The imperial palace in the north of the city did not look so unattainable. If the Vermilion Bird Avenue below was a sharp and straight sword, then the imperial palace was the hilt. What do you see? These days, Master Yen Sei took Ning Ke to travel around Chang'an and saw many historical sites. Every time they arrived at a place, he would ask questions. Ning Ke knew that the old man wanted to use this method to speed up his understanding of talisman Taoism. In fact, whether it was the eaves of Spring Breeze Pavilion or the animal carvings on the eaves, he could really deepen his understanding of talisman Taoism. However, at this time, standing on the city wall and watching the scenery of the city, the whole Chang'an appeared in front of him. Without the bustling appearance, there was only silence and the sense of separation after the line of sight was pulled away. Ordinary people would probably scream excitedly to find where their home was. From the perspective of literature and art, they could probably perceive the historical vicissitudes of this magnificent city left by thousands of years. But from the perspective of talisman Taoism, what could they see? Chang'an City is actually a big tactical array. Master Yen Sei's answer directly shocked Ning Ke and made him speechless. This is a magnificent city that gathered the wisdom of countless cultivators of previous generations. Even with the wealth of the Tang Empire, it took us 30 years to build it. It is only natural that it should be the most powerful tactical matrix in the world. That's why it is called Shocking God. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at Chang'an City under his feet, trying hard to see the general appearance of the tactical array, but to no avail. Master Yen Sei looked at his expression and could not help smiling, saying, the God-shocking tactical array of Chang'an City can't be seen with the naked eye, and most of it is buried underground. I can tell you that the array pivot is under the Imperial Palace, and the Vermilion Bird Avenue is the array route. The old Taoist pointed to the direction of the Imperial Palace with his right hand, and then his fingertips slowly moved down along the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and continued, the array route extends to our feet, that is, the south gate of Vermilion Bird. Then it disperses through the city wall, and returns to all the city holes in the inner and outer city. You can also see the big tactical array of Chang'an City as an extremely complicated and vast talisman. This talisman is composed of countless divine talismans. As long as the array eye is opened, this vast talisman will be activated to protect this magnificent city and its residents. Ning Ke looked at the dense buildings in Chang'an City, looked at the busy but joyful people like ants, and listened to Master Yen Sei's words. He could not help but be shocked, and his admiration and awe were beyond words. The Vermilion Bird painting that I took you to see just now is the most powerful divine talisman in this vast talisman. It took Ning Ke a long time to suppress the shock in his heart. Looking at the magnificent city in front of him, he murmured with emotion, once this big tactical array is opened, I don't know what it will be like. Will the dark clouds cover the sky, or will the earth shake, and the city stay still? No one knows what the picture will be like. I believe that even the designer and the former cultivators responsible for building the tactical array don't know, and they won't want to know, and I don't want to know either. Master Yen Sei looked at him seriously and said, the activation of the God-stunning tactical array means that Chang'an City is about to be breached. If that day comes, it can only mean that our Tang Empire is on the verge of destruction. Ning Ke suddenly thought of a key problem, and looked at Master Yen Sei seriously and said, "Master, you shouldn't tell me such things, especially the array pivot and the array root. It's not good." Master Yen Sei calmly said, "Do you know who is responsible for the god-stunning tactical array of Chang'an City in the Tang Empire now?" "Who?" "Your master, me." Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "And you are my only successor. After I leave this world, you will be responsible for the god-stunning tactical array. So it's natural to let you know some things in advance." Ning Ke did not say anything. With a pale face, he turned to look at Chang'an City below the city tower and shook his head. A very strange sound came out of his mouth. It seemed that he was swearing, and it was more like he was unconsciously muttering. After a long time, he looked back at Master Yen Sei and said bitterly, "Master, don't be so scary. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."